Imagine waking up in 2025 and realizing your life is being negotiated by two invisible forces, an algorithm that predicts your next move with eerie accuracy, and a set of laws scrambling to decide whether that prediction is a suggestion, a command, or a crime. Your maps nudge you to a new route. Your feed chooses your outrage of the day. Your bank approves or denies a loan before a human even blinks. You didn't vote for this system, yet it governs you in the quiet, polite way of modern power. We used to think freedom was obvious, the ability to choose. But how free is a choice engineered to feel inevitable? How ethical is a world that optimizes safety by limiting the landscapes your attention can wander across? Philosophers warned us that freedom is not comfort, it's responsibility. Kant argued that autonomy is obedience to a law you give yourself. Sartre warned that even refusing to choose is still a choice. And then there's us, refreshed, personalized, frictionlessly guided through a world that calls itself neutral while rearranging our desires. Lawmakers call for trustworthy AI. Companies promise privacy by design. Regulators sketch categories: prohibited, high risk, general purpose, frontier models. Meanwhile, the machines keep learning. The stakes are not theoretical. When an AI system slants a score, it can tilt a life: who gets hired, who gets flagged, who gets patient care on time. When alignment fails, the blame swims: is it the model, its trainers, the dataset, the regulator, or the culture that wanted the shortcut? But here's the real twist: our grand ethical debate is happening in fast forward. Yesterday's rulebook was written for static machines, today's systems adapt. Surveillance used to mean cameras on every corner, now it means inference, reconstructing who you are from shadow data you never consciously gave. And there's a deeper fear humming under the headlines, not that AI will replace us, but that we will willingly replace ourselves, outsourcing judgment, taste, even moral courage, to the smooth confidence of prediction. So this film, the one you're about to watch, asks a dangerous question: what if the crisis of AI ethics is really a crisis of human freedom? Not the freedom to do anything, but the freedom to remain a moral agent in a world of optimization. We'll walk through the new laws, the industry promises, and the philosophical landmines. We'll test Kant against recommender systems, pit Mill's harm principle against alignment playbooks, and ask Sartre's hardest question: if existence precedes essence, can a dataset define your essence before you do? If you feel a quiet pressure shaping your day, this is not paranoia, it's design. The question is whether we can design back. If this exploration matters to you, if you feel that tug between convenience and conscience, stick with me to the end. We're going to translate legal timelines and tech jargon into human stakes: your agency, your dignity, your future. If you value work like this, slow, careful, and a little bit fearless, please subscribe. It helps this kind of long-form, independent analysis reach people who've been numbed by short-form certainty. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Where do you draw the line between safety and control? What would ethical AI look like if humans, not markets, set the terms? And if this video gives you a language for conversations you've been wanting to have, share it. Ideas don't spread on their own, we carry them. Alright, let's get serious. Fade in, a quiet room lit only by the glow of a laptop screen. The cursor blinks. Somewhere, far away, a server farm hums like a distant ocean. We live in a time when the idea of freedom has been subtly rewritten. Not in the grand declarations of constitutions or the stirring speeches of revolutions, but in the invisible code of the systems we interact with every day. It is a new kind of freedom, one that feels effortless, fluid, almost intoxicating. You open an app and your favorite music is cued. Your navigation app suggests the quickest route, avoiding traffic you didn't know existed. Your social feed is an endless stream of posts that feel eerily tuned to your current mood. It's all seamless. And that's the point. But here's the paradox: the very systems that make life frictionless also shape the boundaries of that life. The more perfectly a machine predicts your next move, the more it subtly directs it. And as anyone who's studied the mechanics of influence knows, the best kind of control is the kind that feels like choice. Immanuel Kant, writing in the 18th century, defined autonomy not as the ability to do whatever you want, but as the ability to obey laws you have given yourself. In Kant's world, autonomy is about self-legislation, about rationally deciding your path rather than being carried along by impulses, or by someone else's plan. 2 centuries later, Jean-Paul Sartre warned that human beings are condemned to be free, that even refusing to choose is still a choice, and that avoiding responsibility for our decisions is a form of bad faith. Now put those ideas against the backdrop of 2025. The self-given law Kant imagined? It's now surrounded by 1,000 tiny recommendations, nudges, and automated optimizations. The existential weight Sartre described? It's cushioned by predictive systems that promise to think for us. In this environment, our choices are still ours, but they are gently pre-shaped before we ever make them. The tech industry calls this personalization. It's marketed as empowerment. The system knows you so well it can anticipate your needs. But philosophically, there's a darker undertone. Each personalized suggestion is also a narrowing of possible worlds, a trimming of the tree of options until only a few branches remain visible. You feel free because you like what you see. You don't notice the branches that have been quietly pruned away. John Stuart Mill's harm principle offers a classic liberal defense of freedom. Power over individuals is justified only to prevent harm to others. But what happens when the harm is not obvious, when it's not the removal of a right, but the erosion of a capacity? When systems make life so easy that the habit of self-direction weakens, is that a form of harm? Mill might not have foreseen a society where a safety-o could be used as a reason to limit the unpredictable, the uncurated, the uncomfortable. This isn't abstract speculation. The legal frameworks emerging right now, the EU AI Act with its categories of prohibited, high-risk, and general-purpose AI, are designed to keep certain dangers in check. Prohibited systems, like manipulative AI that exploits vulnerabilities, will be banned in Europe starting February 2, 2025. But here's the irony: even low-risk AI, fully compliant with the law, can still undermine autonomy if its economic incentive is to keep you scrolling, clicking, or buying in ways that sidestep reflective choice. A perfectly legal recommender system can still become a perfectly effective behavioral leash. There's a psychological trap here too. Human beings tend to equate effortlessly with good design. When something just works, we rarely stop to ask who made it work that way, and why. This is how delegation drift happens. We hand over small decisions, what to watch next, how to phrase an email, which route to take, until we stop noticing that we've ceded control. And when we do notice, we comfort ourselves with the thought that we could take control back at any time. But like any muscle, autonomy atrophies with disuse. The real challenge is that no single optimization feels dangerous in isolation. It's only when you zoom out, when you see the pattern across all your interactions, that you realize the cumulative effect. The shape of your day, your thoughts, even your identity, is increasingly co-authored by systems you didn't elect, systems whose goals may only partially align with yours. This is the autonomy paradox. We are freer than ever in the superficial sense, more options, more access, more speed, yet the deeper form of freedom, the kind Kant and Sartre cared about, is under quiet siege. The siege doesn't look like chains. It looks like convenience. Cut to black. The hum of the server farm grows louder. In the next part, we'll dissect the mechanics of this siege, how personalization becomes predestination, and why a society that values freedom must be vigilant not only against overt coercion, but against the kind of influence that feels too comfortable to question. Personalization as predestination. The frame shifts, a slow pan across a vast data center. Endless racks, blinking lights, each flicker a decision made somewhere, for someone, without their awareness. If you've ever stood at a crossroads, literal or metaphorical, you know the weight of choice. The pause. The uncertainty. The possibility. But in our hyper-optimized world, most of our crossroads are paved over before we arrive. The turn you take, the music you hear, the article you read, it all comes to you through filters you did not design, shaped by models you will never meet. This is not randomness, it is orchestration. The industry calls it personalization. The experience feels intimate, like a friend who knows your taste in films, the food you crave, even the tone of voice that will get you to click. But unlike a friend, this entity doesn't care about you in the human sense. Its loyalty is not to your well-being, but to the metrics of engagement, conversion, and retention. It is a mirror polished not to reflect your true self, but to reflect the self most likely to comply. Here lies the philosophical pivot. Personalization, taken far enough, is indistinguishable from predestination. The machine doesn't force your hand, it simply arranges your environment so that only certain moves feel natural. Over time, the choices you make are statistically inevitable. The algorithm is not a jailer, it is a stage director, placing props and lighting so you walk the path it has written. In history, power often worked by restricting access, censoring books, sealing borders, silencing dissent. Today's power is subtler. It offers abundance, but an abundance curated so precisely that divergence feels unnecessary. The illusion of infinite choice masks the narrowing of your cognitive map. In the 20th century, Orwell feared a boot stamping on a human face forever. Huxley feared a society so drugged by pleasure it would no longer care to resist. In our time, the threat may be neither the boot nor the drug, but the feed, a stream so tuned to our desires that it slowly edits those desires into conformity. This matters because freedom is not just the ability to act, it is the ability to imagine alternatives. When the set of imaginable alternatives shrinks, so does the scope of freedom. Kant would argue that true autonomy requires the capacity to deliberate among reasons, not just the ability to pick from a list pre-sorted by an opaque system. Sartre would warn that we are slipping into bad faith, telling ourselves we are free while we quietly outsource the act of choosing. The irony is that personalization works best when it's invisible. You rarely notice the unseen options, the songs you weren't recommended, the restaurants you never found because they didn't rank in your map app, the articles buried under algorithmic sediment. Like a river that has been redirected far upstream, you flow through the channel that was dug for you. Legal frameworks, like the EU AI Act, try to address manipulation in extreme cases, banning AI systems that exploit cognitive vulnerabilities or engage in social scoring. But most personalization doesn't meet that legal threshold. It is too gentle, too ordinary, to be called exploitation. And yet, over time, it shapes behavior just as effectively as coercion. The law can forbid the use of chains, but it struggles to regulate the architecture of the cage when the cage is made of preferences. There's also the market reality: optimization is profitable. The business model of much of the internet depends on keeping you in a predictable loop. And in a market driven by competition for attention, even well-intentioned companies face pressure to design systems that reduce unpredictability in human behavior. Unpredictability is costly, predictability pays. We might be tempted to see this as a technological issue, but it's deeper. It's a cultural choice. Do we value friction, the small obstacles that force us to think, to re-evaluate, or do we treat friction as an outdated inefficiency to be eliminated at all costs? Do we accept that freedom sometimes means taking the longer route, hearing the dissenting voice, risking the unfamiliar? Cut to a close-up of a hand swiping on a phone screen. The motion is smooth, practiced. The thumb pauses, not because the user has nothing to choose, but because the choice has already been made. In the next part, we'll explore the second autonomy trap, how safety becomes a pretext for limiting the unpredictable, and why the moral growth of individuals and societies depends on the very risks personalization seeks to remove. We open on a quiet suburban street at night. Streetlights glow in regular intervals. Every house is locked, every lawn trimmed. It feels safe. But the camera lingers, not on what is there, but on what is missing. Safety is one of the most persuasive words in the modern lexicon. Politicians invoke it to justify new laws. Companies brandish it to sell their latest product. Parents shape their children's lives around it. And in the age of AI, safety has become the rallying cry for systems that watch over us, not as neutral guardians, but as constant architects of our experience. On the surface, safety seems unassailable. Who would argue against fewer accidents, fewer crimes, fewer mistakes? The trouble begins when safety becomes a pretext for something else, the quiet removal of unpredictability. Consider how digital platforms frame their safe defaults. An AI-powered moderation system removes content deemed harmful, but the definitions of harm are decided by opaque committees or machine-learned patterns. A navigation app avoids routes with low safety ratings, steering you away from certain neighborhoods entirely. A financial algorithm flags risky clients, making some loans invisible to those who need them most. Each of these decisions is justified in the language of protection, but each also narrows the range of possible experiences. This is not just a technical matter, it's a philosophical one. John Stuart Mill argued that the only justification for limiting someone's liberty is to prevent harm to others, not to protect the individual from their own choices. In his framework, paternalism, restricting freedom for someone's own good, requires extraordinary justification. But in our algorithmic age, paternalism is often the default setting. The result is a slow drift toward what I call risk sterilization, a world designed to minimize exposure to discomfort, uncertainty, and surprise. On paper, it looks like progress. In practice, it erodes the very conditions necessary for moral and psychological growth. Moral courage is built not in the absence of danger, but in the negotiation with it. Creativity emerges from tension, from the friction of encountering what is strange or even unsettling. Think of the difference between a child raised in a perfectly padded environment versus one allowed to climb a tree, fall, and get back up. The first child learns compliance, the second learns resilience. When AI systems quietly pad every edge of our environment in the name of safety, we risk raising a society of compliant navigators, rather than resilient thinkers. Even the new wave of AI regulation, like the EU AI Act, is steeped in the language of safety. Certain systems, such as those exploiting cognitive vulnerabilities, are outright prohibited, and that's good. But the Act's focus on risk categorization reinforces a mindset that the ultimate measure of a system's value is its ability to minimize harm. Missing from this framework is the recognition that some forms of exposure, to conflicting ideas, to challenging content, to the possibility of failure, are not dangers to be eradicated, but crucibles for growth. The tech industry has learned that safe sells. A safe platform attracts advertisers, a safe product attracts investors, and a safe user experience keeps engagement high by reducing moments of discomfort. But safety without context becomes suffocating. Imagine a library where every book has been pre-selected to match your worldview, so you never encounter an idea that unsettles you. That library would feel comfortable. It would also be the death of intellectual freedom. This is why the safety pretext is so dangerous. It dresses limitation as care, making it difficult to resist without sounding reckless. Who would choose danger over safety? But the deeper question is, who decides what is dangerous? And to whom? The camera shifts back to that quiet suburban street. We see now that the locks, the lights, the neat rows, while comforting, also signal absence. The street is silent not because it is peaceful, but because it has been emptied of anything unpredictable. In the next part, we'll examine the third autonomy trap, delegation drift, how tools designed to assist us quietly transition into tools that govern us, and why reclaiming certain decisions is critical to preserving freedom in the AI age. Delegation drift. The scene begins with a pair of hands tying shoelaces. At first, the person fumbles, learning the loops, the knots. Over time, the movements become automatic until one day, a machine offers to do it for them, faster, cleaner, every time. The hands never need to tie another knot again. Delegation is one of humanity's greatest tools. We have always built systems to carry our burdens, animals to plow fields, clocks to measure time, books to store knowledge. In theory, delegation frees us to focus on higher goals. In practice, it also changes us in ways we rarely anticipate. The drift begins innocently. We hand over small, repetitive tasks to machines, calculations, spelling checks, reminders. Then we hand over more subjective tasks, suggesting what to watch, summarizing articles, even drafting personal messages. Eventually, the machine isn't just doing the work, it's making the judgment calls. The AI calendar no longer just reminds you of your meetings, it chooses the optimal time based on predicted energy levels and past behavior. Your smart home doesn't just play music, it decides which playlist will improve your mood based on your biometric data. None of these individual handovers feels alarming. In fact, they feel like progress. But here's the shift: the more decisions we delegate, the less skilled we become at making them ourselves. Psychologists call this decision atrophy, the erosion of our capacity to choose when choices are no longer demanded of us. From a Kantian perspective, this is a moral problem. If autonomy is the capacity to govern oneself according to reason, then over-delegation risks hollowing out that capacity. We may still possess the right to decide, but rights mean little if the ability to exercise them has weakened through disuse. Sartre would frame it as a form of bad faith. We tell ourselves we are still in control, but in reality, we have outsourced the very act that defines control. The danger is compounded by what I call default hardening. A feature introduced as optional, "we can schedule your day for you," quietly becomes the default. Over time, the friction of opting out increases, until the path of least resistance is simply to comply. This is not a conspiracy, it's the natural gravity of convenience. But convenience, as we've seen, can be the most persuasive form of control. Historically, we've seen similar patterns. When the first automatic transmissions appeared, drivers could still choose manual gear shifting. Decades later, manual transmissions are rare, not because they were banned, but because the cultural skill faded. In governance, when citizens stop engaging in local decision-making, they often find that decisions are made for them, and the skill of civic participation withers. Now imagine this dynamic accelerated by machine learning. The systems we delegate to are not static, they learn from our compliance, refining their suggestions, increasing their predictive accuracy. This creates a feedback loop: the more we follow the system's lead, the better it becomes at leading us, and the less inclined we are to resist. The legal conversation barely touches this. Regulations like the EU AI Act address prohibited manipulations and require transparency in certain contexts, but they do not, and perhaps cannot, legislate against the slow erosion of human skill through voluntary delegation. It is not illegal for you to stop making decisions. But it is dangerous, culturally and philosophically, to normalize it. So what's the antidote? First, recognition, to notice when a tool is no longer just assisting but deciding. Second, deliberate resistance, choosing to make some decisions manually, even when it's slower or less efficient. Third, design reforms, interfaces that make the decision-making process visible, showing the user why a choice is recommended and offering meaningful alternatives. The scene closes with the shoelaces again. The person ties them manually, or not because they have to, but because they choose to. The knot is not perfect, but it is theirs. Law in the fast lane, the 2025 regulatory scramble opening shot, a slow zoom on a stack of fresh legal documents on a polished table. The ink is still drying. Outside the window, city lights blink in patterns, human-made laws inside, algorithmic rules outside. While philosophers wrestle with what freedom means in the age of AI, lawmakers face a different kind of urgency: how to write rules fast enough to keep up with machines that learn faster than any human legislature can. In 2025, the scramble has reached a fever pitch. The European Union, with its AI Act, is at the forefront. This is not a single switch to be flipped, but a phased rollout, each stage a checkpoint in a high-speed race between innovation and oversight. The law's heart is a risk-based system: prohibited AI, systems that manipulate behavior through hidden techniques, exploit vulnerabilities, or engage in state-run social scoring. These bans take effect February 2, 2025. High-risk AI applications in areas like hiring, healthcare, and policing, which face strict conformity assessments and documentation requirements. General-purpose AI GPAI powerful models like GPT-class systems, required from August 2, 2025 to provide transparency, model documentation, and systemic risk management. By August 2, 2026, the Act will be fully applicable, with some timelines stretching to 2027 for deeply embedded high-risk systems. This structure signals two truths. First, that Europe believes AI can be both dangerous and indispensable. Second, that danger is not just in the code, but in the context of use. A facial recognition system in a phone lock is not the same as one in a public surveillance grid. The law draws those distinctions with surgical precision, or tries to. Across the Atlantic, the United States is more fragmented. The 2023 Executive Order 14110 on AI safety and security was ambitious, pushing for standards on watermarking, safety testing, and national AI-RD coordination. But on January 20, 2025, it was rescinded, its framework replaced just days earlier, on January 14, by a new executive order focused on AI infrastructure and competitiveness. This pivot reflects a deeper U.S. tension, balancing safety against fears of falling behind China and Europe in the AI race. In practice, the U.S. now leans on agencies and voluntary frameworks. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, still maintains its AI risk management framework and its 2024 generative AI profile, offering guidance on responsible deployment. The FTC and EEOC enforce existing consumer protection and anti-discrimination laws against AI misuse. And states like California have tried to push further. SB 1047, a bill to regulate frontier models, made waves in 2024 before failing under heavy lobbying pressure. Elsewhere, the picture is equally complex. The United Nations passed a non-binding resolution in March 2024 urging safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. The UK has established its AI Safety Institute, tasked with evaluating advanced models and publishing risk assessments for public scrutiny. These efforts shape norms, if not enforceable rules. But even with this patchwork, one thing is clear: legal categories move slower than technological shifts. A law might spend years in drafting and negotiation, while AI capabilities leapfrog every few months. That's why there's a growing fear, not that AI will be unregulated, but that it will be regulated for a world that no longer exists by the time the rules arrive. Here's the philosophical fault line: laws focus on risk prevention, but ethics must focus on freedom preservation. A system can be perfectly compliant and still erode human autonomy if its business model is built on addictive engagement, subtle coercion, or narrowing our decision space. The law can ban the worst offenses, but it cannot legislate moral courage or demand cultural self-reflection. And so we enter 2025 in a paradox of our own making. The law races to define the limits of machine behavior, while machines quietly define the limits of human behavior. The battle is not just over which rules will pass, but over who will be writing the invisible ones, the defaults, the optimizations, the nudges that shape daily life. Closing shot: the legal documents on the table are signed, stamped, and filed away. Cut to a user on their phone, scrolling. The rules have changed, but the feed looks the same. Between the letter and the spirit, cracks in the regulatory armor. The shot opens in a government office basement, rows of metal filing cabinets, each drawer labeled with a regulation number. Dust hangs in the air. Somewhere above, the hum of servers reminds us the real action is happening far from these walls. Passing a law is the beginning of the story, not the end. Enforcement is where ideals collide with incentives, capacity, and politics. In the case of AI, those collisions happen almost immediately. Take the EU AI Act. On paper, its risk-based structure seems airtight: identify prohibited systems, set strict requirements for high-risk categories, ensure transparency for powerful general-purpose models. But the enforcement burden is immense. Every high-risk system must undergo conformity assessments, testing, documentation, and human oversight requirements that need both technical expertise and institutional will. Member states will have to build enforcement bodies capable of auditing systems they may not fully understand. Even more challenging, AI systems evolve. A model deemed low-risk today might, after updates and retraining, cross into high-risk territory without any formal reclassification. The law anticipates this with ongoing compliance duties, but the speed of iteration makes continuous oversight a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to inspect a moving train by running alongside it. You can check pieces, but never the whole. In the United States, the cracks are even wider. Without a unified federal AI law, enforcement depends on existing statutes. The Federal Trade Commission can go after deceptive AI marketing or hidden bias if it violates consumer protection laws, but it can't ban a system for being inherently risky. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission can act if AI hiring tools discriminate, but only after harm has occurred and been reported. Prevention often takes a backseat to reaction. The National Institute of Standards and Technology offers detailed voluntary frameworks, the AI Risk Management Framework, the Generative AI Profile, but these are only as strong as the institutions choosing to adopt them. Large companies with brand reputations to protect may follow them, smaller or less visible players might not. And when competitive pressure is high, even the willing may cut corners. This is where industry lobbying becomes a quiet but decisive force. California's SB 1047, for example, proposed rigorous safety testing, kill switch capabilities for powerful models, and clear accountability in case of catastrophic misuse. On paper, it addressed gaps in both state and federal oversight. But the bill died in 2024, under intense pushback from both tech giants and smaller AI startups, who argued it would stifle innovation. Globally, other fault lines appear. The UK AI Safety Institute aims to test advanced systems before deployment, but participation from private companies is largely voluntary. The UN resolution urging safe AI has symbolic weight, but without enforcement mechanisms, it's a statement of principles, not a shield. And yet, perhaps the most troubling crack is not technical, it's cultural. Laws are reactive. They emerge from consensus, and consensus tends to form around visible harms. AI's most corrosive effects, subtle erosion of autonomy, manipulation framed as personalization, narrowing of cultural imagination, are slow and almost invisible. They do not make headlines like a spectacular failure or an obvious bias scandal. But they change societies more profoundly over time. That gap between the letter of the law and the spirit of freedom is where the danger lies. The letter can say no prohibited manipulations, but the spirit must ask, what counts as manipulation? The letter can demand human oversight, but the spirit must question whether the human is truly overseeing or simply approving whatever the system recommends. To bridge this gap, enforcement needs more than legal muscle. It needs a philosophy of freedom baked into its criteria. Risk assessments must look not only at safety metrics, but at autonomy metrics. Does this system expand or contract the user's decision space? Transparency should mean more than a technical white paper, it should mean intelligible explanations a non-expert can act on. The camera cuts back to the filing cabinets. The laws are filed neatly away. But above, in the hum of the servers, the real rules are being written line by line, in code. Case studies in compliance without ethics we open on a split screen. On the left, a legal compliance certificate stamped the proved. On the right, a social feed spiraling into misinformation, outrage, and quiet manipulation. The implication is immediate: legality and ethics are not the same thing. The gap between what is legal and what is right is not new. But in the AI age, that gap is widening and becoming harder to see. Regulations are written in the language of categories and thresholds, ethics lives in the messier realm of human experience. Take the example of a large-scale recommender system for video content. It passed all existing compliance checks under low-risk classification. The company demonstrated transparency by publishing a 40-page technical document about its algorithm. Yet, within months of deployment, independent researchers found that its personalization loop disproportionately pushed extreme political content to certain demographics. The system was never flagged as high risk, because under current regulations, political radicalization via algorithm is not explicitly prohibited, it's a side effect, not a primary function. Legally compliant. Ethically corrosive. Or consider a hiring AI used by a multinational corporation. It was designed with bias mitigation techniques to comply with anti-discrimination laws. The model was trained on carefully balanced datasets and passed third-party audits. But in practice, it optimized for culture fit based on existing high-performing employees, effectively reproducing the company's demographic homogeneity. The bias wasn't in race or gender, it was in personality and background. Under current US law, that kind of bias often flies under the radar, even if it quietly erodes diversity of thought and experience. Another case emerged in the healthcare sector. An AI triage system was certified under high-risk regulations, complete with documented risk assessments and human oversight protocols. On paper, it was exemplary. But the human oversight consisted of overworked nurses who, due to time pressure, almost always accepted the AI's recommendations without review. Here, the oversight existed in form but not in function, compliance without genuine accountability. These are not malicious actors hiding behind legal loopholes. They are examples of how regulations, even well-intentioned ones, cannot anticipate the subtle ways in which technology reshapes human behavior. Philosophically, this points to a flaw in treating ethics as a checklist. Kant's ethics demands that we treat people as ends in themselves, never merely as means. Compliance frameworks, however, often reduce this to do not violate X explicit rights. They rarely ask whether a system preserves the conditions under which people can meaningfully exercise those rights. A hiring system may not discriminate overtly, but if it narrows the personality spectrum in an organization, it still diminishes the richness of collective agency. Sartre would call this a case of bad faith, believing that because we've followed the rules, we've done the right thing, even when reality tells a different story. The law can compel minimum standards, ethics must push for more than the minimum. There's also an incentive misalignment at play. A company that meets compliance requirements can market its AI as certified safe or regulation compliant. This can lull users, clients, and even regulators into a false sense of security, making deeper scrutiny less likely. The stamp of approval becomes a shield, not a lens. The EU AI Act and similar frameworks recognize this risk to some degree, which is why they include post-market monitoring obligations. But here's the problem: post-market monitoring depends heavily on reporting, and many of the most significant harms, like cultural homogenization, subtle ideological nudging, or gradual dependency, are difficult to measure, let alone report. This is why some ethicists argue for continuous ethical auditing alongside legal compliance, independent, multidisciplinary teams tracking not just risk metrics, but lived outcomes over time. Such audits would ask questions like, are users making more independent decisions, or fewer? Are unexpected patterns of exclusion emerging? Is the system's influence growing in domains it wasn't intended for? Without this kind of scrutiny, we risk creating a future where AI harms don't break the law because the law was never written to see them. The split screen fades. The compliance certificate remains, but the right side, the world it governs, continues to shift under our feet. Power plays, when AI law serves the market, not the citizen opening shot, a dimly lit conference room in a glass tower. Around the table, government officials, corporate lobbyists, and industry lawyers lean over documents. Outside, the city glows, indifferent. The captions on screen could read, "Closed-door meeting, 11:47 p.m. Every major piece of AI legislation tells two stories. One is public, the narrative of protecting citizens, ensuring fairness, preventing harm. The other is whispered in private meetings, the story of market share, national advantage, and the quiet rewriting of rules to favor those with the most influence. AI is not just a technological domain, it's a geopolitical and economic battleground. Whoever sets the standards can shape the market. This is why the European Union's AI Act has become a template that other nations either emulate or resist. But its drafting process was not immune to lobbying. Major tech firms pushed to narrow the definitions of high risk and to limit obligations for general-purpose AI, arguing that overly broad rules would choke innovation. Critics note that some of these concessions make it easier for powerful models to avoid the strictest scrutiny unless they are explicitly deployed in high-stakes contexts. In the United States, the story is more fragmented but no less political. The rescission of Executive Order 14110 in January 2025 and its replacement with a competitiveness-focused directive signaled a shift. AI policy tilted away from risk management toward economic positioning. Industry leaders applauded, safety advocates worried it meant that the US would prioritize speed over scrutiny. Without a binding federal law, much of AI governance in the US is now shaped through agency guidelines and industry self-regulation, frameworks that are far easier to influence quietly. Lobbying often works in subtle ways. A proposed law may contain strong enforcement mechanisms in its early drafts, but after rounds of stakeholder consultation, those mechanisms are watered down or replaced with voluntary measures. Technical definitions may be adjusted so that compliance is cheaper for big players who can afford the certification process, but harder for small competitors, effectively consolidating market power. California's SB 1047 is a textbook example. It sought to regulate frontier models through mandatory safety testing, emergency shutdown protocols, and transparent incident reporting. Industry lobbying reframed these provisions as existential threats to innovation, job growth, and U.S. leadership in AI. Public opinion was swayed with op-eds warning of innovation flight to less regulated countries. By the time the bill died, the narrative had shifted from protecting the public to protecting the economy. Globally, geopolitical rivalry fuels these dynamics. The US, EU, and China are locked in a race, not just to build the most advanced AI systems, but to define the rules under which everyone else will operate. If one bloc imposes strict guardrails while another allows looser development, companies may relocate or reroute their innovation pipelines. This creates a perverse incentive for regulators to ease up, not because it's safer, but because it's strategic. Philosophically, this exposes the gap between legal intention and political reality. Kant would remind us that ethical law is universal, it should be crafted as if it were to apply equally to all rational beings. But in the world of AI regulation, laws are often crafted with a quiet bias toward the interests of those powerful enough to influence their shape. Sartre might call this collective bad faith, governments and companies convincing themselves they are acting for the greater good while pursuing agendas rooted in fear of losing status or profit. The danger is that when AI laws are designed with economic dominance in mind, human autonomy becomes a secondary consideration. The citizen is protected only insofar as it aligns with the market's health. If those interests diverge, the market usually wins. Closing shot, the camera pulls back from the conference room to reveal the skyline, a grid of illuminated windows. Somewhere in those buildings, laws are still being written. The question is, for whom? The age of inference, privacy beyond data. Opening shot, a close-up of a coffee shop table. A phone rests face down. The owner thinks they are offline. Cut to an unseen dashboard miles away, where their location, recent purchases, and even predicted mood are already displayed. For decades, privacy debates have revolved around data we consciously give away, the forms we fill out, the photos we upload, the search queries we type. The assumption was simple: if you wanted privacy, you could choose not to share. But in 2025, that idea is a relic. The real power of AI doesn't just come from the data you provide, it comes from the inferences drawn from data you didn't even know you were giving. Inference is the quiet art of prediction. It's when a system deduces your political leanings from your reading habits, your health risks from your grocery receipts, your personality type from your word choice in emails. None of these facts were directly disclosed. They emerge from patterns, tiny statistical clues aggregated and refined until they paint a portrait of you that even you might not recognize. Philosopher Michel Foucault once described the panopticon as a metaphor for modern surveillance, a structure in which the possibility of being watched is enough to change behavior. Today's AI panopticon is more insidious. It doesn't just watch, it interprets, categorizes, and predicts. You are not merely seen, you are defined. And unlike the guards in a prison tower, the watchers here are invisible, distributed, and often automated. This is why traditional notions of consent are breaking down. You can no longer meaningfully consent to what is done with your data, because the most significant uses of it are not about the data itself, they're about what can be inferred from it. A location ping might seem harmless, but in the hands of a predictive model, it could signal pregnancy, unemployment, or even political activism. Some companies frame this as personalization, tailoring your experience to fit your inferred needs. Others use it for safety or fraud prevention. Governments might deploy it for public health surveillance or national security. But in every case, the inference comes first, and your role is reduced to a statistical pattern to be acted upon. The EU AI Act touches on this indirectly by banning certain manipulative or exploitative systems, but it does not explicitly grant people rights over inferences. In the United States, privacy law is even further behind. Most states regulate the collection and sharing of identifiable data, but have little to say about the insights derived from it. This is a dangerous gap. Philosophically, John Stuart Mill's harm principle is instructive here. He argued that the only legitimate reason to limit someone's freedom is to prevent harm to others. But what about systems that can preemptively shape your opportunities or limit your choices based on inferred risk? That's not prevention of harm, it's the quiet allocation of privilege and penalty without due process. Apple's private cloud compute, introduced with promises of on-device processing and hardened privacy enclaves, represents one attempt to counter this trend. It limits the flow of raw data to central servers, aiming to keep sensitive interactions local. But privacy by design, while laudable, doesn't solve the inference problem, it only changes where the inference happens. A system can protect your raw data while still using it to predict and influence you in ways you never agreed to. This is why a new concept, consent to inference, is emerging in ethical debates. Just as you have the right to control who sees your medical records, you might need the right to control what kinds of predictions can be made about you, and by whom. This would mean not just regulating data collection, but limiting certain kinds of pattern recognition altogether. Closing shot, the coffee shop again. The phone is still face down, untouched. But somewhere, an algorithm has already scheduled an ad for later tonight, chosen specifically for the state of mind it believed you'll be in after your commute. The owner will think they made the choice themselves. How machines build you, the mechanics of inference. Opening shot, a table scattered with puzzle pieces. Some are obvious, faces, colors, text. Others are fragments, meaningless alone. Slowly, unseen hands begin fitting them together, and a picture emerges. The face in the puzzle is yours. Inference begins in fragments. An AI system doesn't need a full autobiography to know you, it needs only enough scattered points to triangulate the rest. A purchase history here, a GPS coordinate there, a late-night search query, a string of likes on a social platform. None of these details seem significant on their own. But when aggregated, they form what data scientists call a feature space, a multidimensional map of your behavior, preferences, and likely future actions. Here's how it works. Every data point you produce, whether it's actively shared or passively collected, becomes a coordinate in this feature space. Algorithms then compare your coordinates to millions of others, searching for patterns. If enough people with a similar pattern bought running shoes in March, there's a high probability you'll do the same. If most users who read a certain political article later subscribe to a specific newsletter, the system knows which ad to serve you next. The process doesn't require intimate disclosures. Even seemingly anonymized datasets can be relinked to individuals with startling accuracy, because behavioral patterns are as unique as fingerprints. This is why we don't collect personal data can be a misleading reassurance. You don't have to be named for the system to know exactly who you are. Some inferences are banal, predicting your next purchase, your favorite restaurant. Others are profound and potentially dangerous, predicting your mental health status, your likelihood of defaulting on a loan, your political leanings. In 2012, a well-known retail chain famously identified a teenage girl's pregnancy before her family knew, based solely on subtle changes in her purchasing patterns. That was a primitive form of inference compared to what's possible in 2025. Modern systems can layer inferences on top of inferences. A model might infer your sleep patterns from device usage, then combine that with heart rate data from a fitness tracker, then correlate those with mood indicators from your social media posts. Suddenly, the system knows you're likely stressed, vulnerable, and about to make an impulse purchase. The ad you see next is no accident. From a Kantian perspective, the problem is not just privacy, it's dignity. To treat someone as an end in themselves means engaging with them as a reasoning agent, not as a predictable vector in a probability matrix. When systems reduce you to patterns to be nudged, they risk treating you as a means to engagement, sales, or control. The EU AI Act tries to address harmful manipulations, banning AI that exploits cognitive vulnerabilities, but its definitions are narrow. An AI that predicts your mood and adjusts your news feed accordingly might evade those definitions entirely, as long as it doesn't cross an explicit prohibited practice threshold. US law is even less prepared. Most privacy frameworks still assume the core harm is unauthorized sharing of data, not the quiet internal use of it for behavioral steering. Regulating this is notoriously hard because inference is not a single event, it's a continuous process embedded in nearly every system that handles data. Even if you regulate outputs, e.g., certain decisions can't be made by AI alone, the underlying models still generate those predictions, ready to influence human intermediaries. Some technologists propose an inference registries, where companies must disclose the categories of predictions they make about individuals. Others argue for a right to object to certain inferences, much like the right to object to certain kinds of data processing under GDPR. But these are early ideas in a field moving at machine speed. Closing shot, the puzzle is complete now. The camera pulls back to reveal it's not just a picture of you, it's a version of you that only the system knows, built from fragments you didn't realize you'd given away. Somewhere, a decision is already being made based on that portrait. Living in the machine's mirror opening shot, a person stands before a mirror. At first, the reflection matches perfectly. Then, almost imperceptibly, it begins to change, not reflecting who they are, but who it expects them to be. There is a strange psychological weight to being constantly profiled, even if the profiling is invisible. You may never see the spreadsheets, the feature maps, or the prediction scores, but you feel them in the subtle shaping of your digital environment. A restaurant suggestion appears at just the right moment to influence your lunch plans. A news headline matches your existing frustrations. A music playlist aligns uncannily with your mood. None of it is overtly manipulative. And yet, over time, you begin to move within the contours of the machine's expectations. This is what I call living in the machine's mirror, an existence where you are not just reacting to the world, but to a world continually reshaped to match a portrait of you that is, itself, an algorithmic creation. You don't see the portrait, but it sees you, and it updates constantly. Psychologists have long documented the looking-glass self, the idea that we form our identities partly by perceiving how others see us. But here, the other is not a person with nuance, empathy, and unpredictability. It is a statistical model that knows your patterns better than your friends, but not your reasons. And when you live in its reflection long enough, you start to align with it. The effect can be subtle. Suppose an algorithm predicts you're interested in minimalist interior design. It starts showing you more minimalist content, more ads for white furniture, more videos of decluttered homes. Over months, you find yourself disliking anything ornate, not because you considered and rejected it, but because it simply stopped showing up. What feels like taste is often the narrowing of your exposure. This phenomenon intersects with what Sartre warned about as bad faith, when we accept roles or identities given to us without confronting their origins. In the age of AI inference, bad faith is easy because the role is not handed to you explicitly. You simply inhabit the one the system predicts. And because it feels like it emerged from your own preferences, you rarely think to question it. There's also a feedback loop at play. Every time you act in alignment with the machine's prediction, the model's confidence increases. This strengthens the very patterns that led to the prediction in the first place. You are, in a sense, training your own reflection. The mirror does not just observe, it shapes. Legally, there is little to prevent this. The EU AI Act might restrict overt manipulations targeting vulnerable groups, but shaping exposure is not a clearly prohibited category. In the US, there's almost no recognition of algorithmic identity shaping as a regulatory concern. Privacy law might protect against unauthorized sharing of your personal information, but it says nothing about the quiet curation of your reality based on inferences. Philosophically, this is where autonomy erodes most silently. Kant's vision of autonomy depends on the capacity for rational deliberation, choosing your principles based on self-given laws. But when the range of experiences and information available to you is invisibly filtered, your deliberation is built on incomplete soil. You may still be choosing, but only from within a carefully landscaped garden whose paths are pruned for you. Some technologists argue for algorithmic diversity, deliberately introducing randomness or exposure to counter predictive content. Others propose transparency tools that show users what categories the system has placed them in and how those categories are shaping their experience. The challenge is cultural as much as technical. Would people opt for the discomfort of unpredictability once they've grown accustomed to the convenience of a personalized world? Closing shot, the person in the mirror steps back. The reflection is smiling, confident, exactly as the system thinks it should be. But the person's real face, tired, questioning, remains unseen. Somewhere, the mirror is updating its files. Consent to inference, the missing right opening shot, a close-up of a signature line on a contract. The pen hesitates. The text above it is blurred, but we hear the voiceover, "Do you consent to being defined?" In 2025, you can refuse cookies on a website. You can revoke access to your GPS location. In some jurisdictions, you can demand that your personal data be deleted entirely. But there is no equivalent control for the inferences drawn about you. The machine can continue to profile, categorize, and predict, even when the raw data it learned from is gone. It doesn't need your permission anymore, it has your pattern. This gap is not accidental, it's structural. Privacy law evolved in an era when the data meant discrete records, names, phone numbers, credit histories. Consent was framed as a gate at the point of collection. But AI inference is a different beast. It thrives on the exhaust of daily life, pulling meaning from traces you barely notice. A single Instagram like, combined with a payment timestamp and a weather report, can hint at your mood, your routine, your vulnerabilities. None of those elements alone feels private. Together, they form a private reality you never agreed to share. The idea of consent to inference challenges this model. It says you should have the right not only to control the collection of data, but to limit or reject certain predictions made about you. In theory, this could take several forms. Inference registries. Companies disclose the categories of predictions they make, e.g., likely to be pregnant, likely to support X political party, likely to buy luxury goods. Opt-out rights. Individuals can block certain categories of inferences, either universally or by company. High-sensitivity bans. Some inferences, e.g., health status, sexual orientation, political leanings, could be prohibited unless explicitly consented to. But each of these proposals runs into resistance from multiple directions. Technically, it's difficult to draw clear boundaries between harmless and sensitive predictions, because one can be derived from the other. Politically, companies argue that inference is integral to personalization, fraud prevention, and safety, functions that users benefit from even if they don't see the mechanics. Economically, limiting inferences strikes at the heart of the attention economy's business model. The EU AI Act comes closest to touching this space through its prohibition of AI systems that exploit vulnerabilities of specific groups, but it stops short of granting individuals explicit rights over inferences. The US has no such provision in federal law. And the geopolitical race for AI dominance means neither side wants to impose constraints that might slow innovation compared to global rivals. Philosophically, the case for consent to inference is grounded in both Kantian and Millian ethics. Kant would argue that making predictions about a person in ways that shape their opportunities without their awareness is to treat them as a means to an end, whether that end is profit, engagement, or control. Mill's harm principle would see inference without consent as a form of unacknowledged power over the individual, one that can cause harm not through overt coercion, but through the quiet rearrangement of their possibilities. Critics worry that such rights would be impossible to enforce. How do you prove that an ad you saw, or didn't see, was the result of a prohibited inference? How do you track the inferences happening inside black box models? The answer may lie in mandatory transparency interfaces, dashboards where users can see, in plain language, the categories and confidence scores the system has assigned to them. This would at least make the invisible visible. The deeper challenge is cultural. For decades, people have traded privacy for convenience without much resistance. Asking them to care about something as abstract as consent to inference might feel like a hard sell, until they see how those inferences define the jobs they get, the loans they're offered, or the news they read. Closing shot, the contract is back in focus. The person signs, but this time, the text above the line is clear: you consent to being known better than you know yourself. The pen hesitates longer this time. Alignment and the illusion of control. Opening shot, a darkened lab. A single monitor glows, displaying a line of text: the system is aligned. The words feel reassuring, until we ask, aligned with what? In AI ethics, few phrases are repeated as often, or as vaguely, as alignment. The idea seems simple enough: make sure artificial intelligence systems pursue goals that match human values. But the deeper you look, the more this phrase frays at the edges. There are, broadly speaking, two types of alignment in the AI world. The first is instrumental alignment, getting the system to do exactly what you ask, reliably and predictably. The second is value alignment, getting the system to do what you should want, even if you didn't phrase it perfectly. The first is an engineering problem, the second is a philosophical one. Instrumental alignment is about precision. If you tell a navigation AI to get you to the airport, you want it to choose a route that balances speed and safety, not one that sends you through a flooded road because you forgot to say, avoid dangerous conditions. Value alignment is trickier. It's about embedding moral and cultural norms into a system that doesn't share our history, emotions, or capacity for moral reasoning. A Kantian might argue that true alignment means the system must treat every person as an end in themselves. A utilitarian might define it as maximizing overall well-being. These frameworks are not just different, they are sometimes in direct conflict. This is where the illusion of control creeps in. We imagine alignment as a final state, something achieved once, certified, and then trusted. But in reality, alignment is an ongoing negotiation. Models evolve. Contexts shift. A system aligned with the values of one group might be dangerously misaligned with the values of another. What's ethical in one cultural setting may be manipulative in another. The EU AI Act tries to bake alignment into law by requiring general-purpose AI providers to document intended uses, conduct risk assessments, and share information downstream. These measures aim to ensure that when AI is integrated into sensitive applications, like hiring, policing, or healthcare, there's a paper trail of accountability. In theory, this creates guardrails. In practice, it can also become a compliance exercise, a matter of filling out forms rather than engaging in deep moral reflection. And then there's the problem of blame. In the alignment conversation, responsibility is often treated like a hot potato, passed between model developers, fine-tuners, deployers, and end-users. If an AI system makes a harmful decision, who is accountable? The developer who built the underlying architecture? The team who fine-tuned it on specific data? The company that deployed it in a particular context? Or the human operator who clicked approve on its recommendation? Without a clear framework, the blame can disperse so widely that no one feels truly responsible. This is not just a legal gap, it's a moral hazard. If no single actor feels the weight of consequences, incentives to prevent harm weaken. The tech industry's answer to this has been red teaming and evaluation, testing systems for dangerous outputs before release. Institutions like the UK's AI Safety Institute and US agencies working with NIST have begun building public evaluation frameworks. These efforts matter, but they are still focused on detection rather than prevention. And prevention requires clear accountability. Here, Kant's principle is sharp: moral agents must own the consequences of their actions, including those taken through tools they wield. If a corporation uses an AI tool to make life-altering decisions, it inherits the moral responsibility for those outcomes, even if the tool acted in unexpected ways. Sartre would go further: there is no escaping responsibility, you cannot hide behind the excuse that the AI did it. Yet that's exactly the narrative we risk normalizing. AI becomes the fall guy. Mistakes are framed as model errors rather than institutional failures. The more powerful the systems become, the easier it is to treat them as autonomous moral agents, when in reality, they are amplifiers of the incentives and blind spots of their makers. Closing shot: the monitor in the lab again. The words "the system is aligned" fade, replaced by a blinking cursor. It's waiting for someone to decide what alignment really means. The problem of blame, when responsibility evaporates. Opening shot, a relay race in slow motion. The baton is passed from one runner to the next, over and over. At the final frame, the baton is gone, but everyone insists they handed it off correctly. When AI systems cause harm, responsibility is rarely clear-cut. Instead, it diffuses across layers of actors, each one claiming their role was too small, too distant, or too constrained to bear the weight of accountability. The result is a moral vacuum, a space where victims search for answers and find only the shrug of collective denial. Consider a real-world example from the healthcare sector. A hospital deploys an AI tool to prioritize patient care. The system recommends sending a patient home instead of admitting them. Days later, that patient dies from a condition the AI failed to flag. The software vendor blames the hospital for improper implementation. The hospital blames the vendor for model inaccuracy. The doctors point to system guidelines that overrode their judgment. Each layer points elsewhere, and the family is left navigating a labyrinth of disclaimers. Or take a hiring algorithm designed to improve efficiency. The AI passes all bias audits, yet after months of use, data shows it disproportionately rejects candidates from certain regions. The vendor claims its training data was neutral. The company insists it only followed recommendations. The regulator finds no explicit violation of anti-discrimination law. Here again, everyone did their part, and yet systemic harm occurred, harm that slips between the cracks of law and ethics alike. This isn't just legal evasion, it's structural design. AI supply chains often involve multiple entities, foundation model developers who build large-scale architectures, fine-tuners who adapt models for specific tasks, deployers who integrate the AI into products or workflows, operators who interact with the system day-to-day. Each of these actors touches the system, but none owns it in full. This segmentation creates plausible deniability. The developer says, "We didn't decide how it would be used." The deployer says, "We didn't create the base model." The operator says, "We followed the tool's recommendation." The EU AI Act attempts to address this by creating distinct obligations for each role in the AI value chain. Developers of general-purpose AI must assess systemic risks and document capabilities, deployers must ensure context-specific compliance, operators must be trained and aware of system limitations. On paper, this distributes responsibility. In reality, it can fragment it further, making it harder, not easier, to trace a straight line from harm to accountable party. Philosophically, this is where Kant's duty ethics and Sartre's existential responsibility converge. Kant would insist that moral duty is not transferable. If you foresee the possibility of harm from a tool you release, you bear responsibility for preventing it. Sartre would remind us that even when we act under constraints, we are still choosing, and thus still accountable, for the consequences of our actions. Passing the baton doesn't absolve you if you know the race might end in disaster. The psychological phenomenon at play here is diffusion of responsibility. In groups, individuals are less likely to feel personally accountable for outcomes, assuming someone else will handle it. AI systems, by their very nature, amplify this diffusion. The more complex the chain of actors, the easier it is to believe it wasn't really my fault. One potential remedy is the layered duty model, explicitly defining primary, secondary, and tertiary responsibilities at each stage of AI development and deployment. In this model, developers hold primary responsibility for foreseeable technical risks. Deployers hold primary responsibility for contextual risks. Operators hold primary responsibility for active oversight and intervention. These duties would overlap intentionally, ensuring no harm falls into the gaps. But implementing such a model requires more than law. It requires a cultural shift toward embracing responsibility as part of professional identity, not as a legal liability to be minimized. Closing shot, the relay race again, but this time, the camera follows the baton. We see exactly who touches it, and when. No one can say it vanished on its own. Alignment in the lab, chaos in the wild opening shot, a gleaming prototype in a controlled testing chamber. Engineers in lab coats nod approvingly as the system passes every benchmark. Cut to the same system in a crowded marketplace as noise, unpredictability, and chaos swallowing the neatness of the lab. The AI safety world loves benchmarks. Red teaming, stress tests, controlled simulations, these are the rituals of modern alignment. They are not without value. In a lab, you can measure exactly how a system responds to certain prompts, where it resists harmful instructions, how well it follows constraints. But reality is not a lab. Time and again, systems that perform flawlessly under test conditions behave unpredictably in the wild. The gap is not just technical, it's epistemic. No test suite can capture the full complexity of human interaction, cultural variation, and adversarial ingenuity waiting outside controlled environments. Take the example of a chatbot deployed for customer support. In the lab, it refused to give medical advice, consistently redirecting users to human professionals. In production, however, real-world users found ways to reframe their questions, bypassing the safety guardrails without explicitly triggering prohibited queries. Within weeks, the bot was confidently offering unverified medical recommendations. The alignment wasn't broken by malice inside the system, it was broken by the creativity of humans outside it. Another case involved an image recognition model trained to filter explicit content. It passed all test sets with near-perfect accuracy. But when rolled out globally, cultural differences in what counted as explicit caused outrage in multiple markets. In some countries, the model over-censored art and political imagery, in others, it under-censored material considered obscene. The alignment goal, remove explicit content, was technically met, but without context, the result was social discord. This is a pattern. Alignment as practiced today is often narrow alignment, optimizing for a fixed set of testable conditions. Once a system encounters edge cases, adversarial prompts, or shifts in context, the narrowness is exposed. It's like teaching a child to behave perfectly at the dinner table without preparing them for the chaos of a street festival. The EU AI Act acknowledges that high-risk systems require post-market monitoring, but the infrastructure for that is still emerging. Continuous monitoring demands not only technical pipelines for feedback, but also legal authority and cultural willingness to act quickly when things go wrong. In many jurisdictions, that feedback loop is slow, fragmented, or entirely absent. Philosophically, this problem echoes what Sartre called facticity, the unchangeable facts of a situation, and transcendence, our ability to move beyond them. In AI terms, the lab is the facticity, the known conditions we can test for. The wild is the transcendence, the unpredictable reality that will always escape the bounds of pre-deployment planning. True alignment must anticipate not only facticity, but the inevitability of transcendence. One proposed solution is contextual alignment, building systems that adapt their safety behaviors based on cultural, situational, and even individual factors. But this introduces new risks. Adaptive systems can drift, changing their own interpretations of aligned behavior over time. That's how you get an AI content filter that, 6 months in, quietly redefines what's acceptable without human oversight noticing until too late. Another approach is tripwire design, embedding self-monitoring mechanisms that detect when the system is operating outside its tested parameters and trigger a shutdown or human intervention. This is the spirit behind California's proposed kill-switched requirements in SB 1047, which failed in 2024 under industry pressure. The pushback revealed the tension. Companies fear that giving regulators or even internal teams a quick off switch might slow down innovation or create security vulnerabilities. At the heart of this is a simple truth: alignment is not a one-time achievement but a living relationship between humans and machines. It demands humility, acknowledging that the moment we declare a system safe, we may already be blind to the conditions under which that safety will fail. Closing shot, the prototype from the lab is now in the marketplace. A small glitch goes unnoticed in the crowd. The camera lingers on it as it grows, a hairline crack that will one day become a fault line. Building a layered accountability framework. Opening shot, a set of concentric circles drawn on a sheet of paper. Each circle is labeled developer, deployer, operator, auditor. The camera slowly zooms in until the lines blur together, hinting that in reality, these roles overlap. If alignment is the compass, accountability is the anchor. Without it, even the best-intentioned AI governance drifts, pulled by market incentives, political pressure, and the sheer complexity of modern systems. The recurring problem we've seen is that responsibility is often distributed but rarely anchored. To fix that, accountability needs to be layered and deliberate, not accidental. The layered accountability framework begins with the premise that no single actor should be able to say, "It wasn't my job." Every stakeholder, from the research lab building the base model to the end user in the field, holds some degree of responsibility. The layers are designed to overlap on purpose, creating redundancy in ethical oversight. Layer 1, Developers, Foundational Responsibility. Foundation model creators hold primary accountability for systemic risks. This means more than technical performance, it includes foreseeable misuse. If you release a general-purpose language model, you must document not only its intended uses but also its plausible misuses, complete with mitigation strategies. Developers should also be required to integrate tripwires, self-monitoring protocols that flag when the model's behavior deviates from tested parameters. Layer 2, Fine-tuners and integrators, contextual responsibility. These actors adapt models for specific industries or use cases. Their duty is to understand how context changes risk. A healthcare chatbot, for example, requires far more rigorous oversight than a trivia app, even if they share the same base model. Fine-tuners must audit domain-specific datasets, verify that the adapted model meets both general safety standards and sector-specific regulations, and disclose any modifications that alter its behavior in high-stakes scenarios. Layer 3, Deployers, Operational Responsibility. Deployers control the point of contact between the AI and the public. This is where safety protocols meet user experience. Deployers must provide clear interfaces for oversight, dashboards that allow human operators to review, override, and explain AI outputs. They should also bear the burden of ensuring post-market monitoring, collecting performance data in the wild, identifying drift, and initiating retraining or rollback when necessary. Layer 4, Operators, Active Oversight Responsibility. These are the people interacting with the AI day-to-day: doctors, teachers, loan officers, customer support agents. Operators need training not just in how to use the system, but in when not to use it. They must be empowered, and required, to override AI recommendations when human judgment deems it necessary. This layer collapses if operators are pressured to defer to the AI for speed or efficiency. Layer 5, Independent Auditors, External Accountability. No system should be accountable only to its creators or deployers. Independent auditing bodies, technical, ethical, and legal, should have the authority to inspect models, deployment contexts, and outcome data. These audits must be public-facing enough to build trust, while protecting sensitive intellectual property where necessary. The strength of this framework is that it resists the diffusion of responsibility. Each layer carries overlapping duties. If a harmful decision slips past the developer's safeguards, it should still be caught by the integrator, or the deployer, or the operator, or the auditor. The system fails only if every layer abdicates its role, making it far easier to identify where the breach occurred. The EU AI Act moves in this direction by defining obligations for providers, deployers, and importers, but its categories are still too discrete. Real-world AI systems often have blurry ownership lines, especially in open-source or API-driven ecosystems. The US regulatory landscape is even looser, relying heavily on voluntary adoption of standards like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. The layered model would turn those voluntary norms into binding duties. Philosophically, this approach aligns with Kant's categorical imperative: act in such a way that your role in a system could be universalized without eroding human dignity. It also nods to Sartre's insistence that we cannot escape responsibility for our choices, even when acting within institutions. Culturally, it reframes accountability not as a legal burden but as a professional ethic, something to be embraced, not evaded. It treats AI harm not as a black swan event but as an expected risk that can and should be intercepted at multiple points. Closing shot, the concentric circles from the opening are now drawn in ink instead of pencil. Each ring is solid, overlapping, unbreakable on its own, and together, far stronger than any single line. Alignment, accountability, and the problem of blame. Opening shot, a dim studio. A painter stands before a canvas, brush poised. On the desk nearby, a laptop screen glows with an AI-generated image, eerily similar to what the painter was about to create. For most of human history, creativity has been a deeply personal act, an extension of our identity, our way of making sense of the world. Whether you're composing music, writing a novel, or crafting a meal, the process is as much about the journey as the product. But in 2025, that relationship is changing. AI can now generate in seconds what once took us days, months, or years. And it can do it in ways that mimic our style so closely that even we might mistake the machine's output for our own. The implications go far beyond questions of copyright or intellectual property. At stake is something older and deeper, the role creativity plays in defining who we are. Hannah Arendt distinguished between labor, the work we do to survive, and action, which includes the acts through which we reveal ourselves to others and shape the shared world. Creative work, in this sense, is a form of action. It is how we make our private vision public, and in doing so, leave a trace of ourselves in the world. When a machine can perform the outward form of that action, producing a song, a painting, a short story, without the inner labor of human thought and feeling, we face a dilemma. If the output is indistinguishable from ours, does it matter that the experience is different? Does a poem hold the same meaning if it is generated by a pattern recognition model trained on millions of other poems, rather than by a human grappling with the weight of language and life? Some argue that the answer lies in intent. A human creator imbues their work with purpose, even if the audience never fully understands it. The machine does not intend in any moral or emotional sense, it follows statistical correlations. But the lines blur when we use AI as a tool in our own creative process. If you draft a melody, feed it into an AI for arrangement, and then tweak the result, is that still your work? Or have you become a curator of machine suggestions rather than an originator? This is where Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism offers clarity. Sartre held that existence precedes essence, that we define ourselves through our actions. If creative acts are one of the ways we shape our essence, then outsourcing too much of that process risks outsourcing a piece of ourselves. Even if the final product is better, the process of making it is part of what makes us. There's also a communal dimension. Culture is not just the sum of works produced, it's the ongoing conversation between creators and audiences, shaped over time. If much of that conversation is mediated, or even dominated, by synthetic voices, the culture itself begins to shift. The AI is not a neutral participant. Its training data reflects existing cultural biases and market trends, potentially amplifying what is popular and diminishing what is rare or unconventional. Over time, the diversity of voices may narrow, even as the volume of output explodes. The EU AI Act nods to this issue indirectly, with transparency requirements for AI-generated content in certain contexts, but it does not address the existential question, how much of ourselves can we automate before the meaning of authorship changes beyond recognition? Some technologists propose a human-in-the-loop principle for creative AI, always involve a human in the conceptual or finalizing stages of any significant work. Others advocate for provenance systems like the Content Authenticity Initiative, CAI, which can label the origin and transformation of creative works. These technical measures can help preserve human authorship as a recognized category, but they cannot restore the personal growth lost when creation becomes mostly curation. Closing shot, the painter steps back from the canvas. The AI-generated image on the laptop still glows beside it. The two works are similar, but not identical. One is faster, cleaner, perhaps more commercially viable. The other is imperfect, layered, alive. The question hangs in the air, which one carries the weight of a life? The economics of replaced effort. Opening shot, an empty newsroom. Desks once cluttered with drafts and coffee cups now sit in silence. In the corner, a single workstation runs an AI model, churning out articles faster than an entire human staff ever could. The automation of labor has been with us for centuries, but the arrival of AI in creative and knowledge work marks a turning point. In the industrial era, machines replaced muscle. In the digital era, they replaced routine calculation. Now, they're beginning to replace judgment, style, and the subtle craft of communication. For many industries, the economic case is clear. Why pay a team of writers, designers, or analysts when a single AI system can generate thousands of words, images, or data reports at a fraction of the cost? From a purely market perspective, replacing expensive human labor with faster, cheaper machine output seems almost inevitable. But economic efficiency is not the same as social value. The disappearance of certain jobs doesn't just change individual livelihoods, it reshapes entire ecosystems. Consider the creative arts. When AI can design ad campaigns, compose jingles, and draft scripts in seconds, entry-level opportunities for human creators shrink. These were the roles where many learned their craft, built their portfolios, and developed a voice. Without them, the pipeline for future innovators narrows. Hannah Arendt's distinction between labor and work is useful here. Labor sustains life, food, shelter, basic needs, while work creates the lasting artifacts of culture and civilization. Many AI replacements target work, not just labor. And while a machine can mimic the product of work, it cannot replicate the lived process that gives human work its cultural depth. The displacement is not only in traditionally creative roles. Knowledge-intensive professions, law, medicine, finance, are seeing parts of their workflows automated. Contract review, diagnostic imaging, risk modeling, these tasks once justified significant billable hours. Now, AI can perform them in minutes, challenging the economic foundations of those professions. The promise from industry leaders is that automation will free humans to focus on higher-value tasks. But history shows a more mixed reality. In many cases, the higher-value tasks never materialize at the same scale, and workers are simply let go. The result is not liberation from drudgery, but unemployment, or a race to the bottom for whatever human labor remains in demand. From a Kantian perspective, this raises moral questions about the duty of employers. If people are ends in themselves, not merely means to profit, then replacing them without regard for their well-being violates that principle. From a utilitarian view, the calculus is also troubling. A small gain in efficiency for companies may come at the cost of widespread social harm through job loss, skill erosion, and economic inequality. The EU AI Act touches labor indirectly through transparency and documentation requirements for certain high-risk systems, but it is not designed to address the economic displacement of creative or professional labor. In the US, the conversation remains fragmented. Labor unions push for protections in contracts, while lawmakers debate whether existing employment law is enough to cover AI-driven changes. Some suggest technical and policy measures to mitigate the impact. Provenance and labeling, ensuring audiences know whether a work was machine-generated, could help preserve demand for human-authored products. AI royalties, requiring companies to pay into a fund when models are trained on copyrighted material, redistributing revenue to affected creators. Job transition programs, public or private initiatives to retrain displaced workers for new roles, though these face the challenge of finding roles that are truly insulated from automation. But there's a deeper, less tangible loss at play. Work is not only a source of income, it is also a source of identity, purpose, and social connection. The erosion of these elements cannot be compensated for by universal basic income alone. Sartre's view of self-creation through action suggests that stripping away the opportunities to act meaningfully in the world diminishes not just our economy, but our humanity. Closing shot, the newsroom again. The AI terminal continues to generate headlines. Outside, the city moves on, unaware that one more place where people once made meaning together has gone quiet. When value shifts from human to machine, opening shot, a museum in the year 2030. A crowd gathers, not around a Rembrandt or a Picasso, but in front of a vast AI-generated installation. The plaque reads, produced in 12 seconds, 2028. The economic displacement of human labor is only part of the story. The deeper shift happens when society begins to redefine value itself, when efficiency and output become the primary markers of worth, even in domains that once celebrated human imperfection. We've seen echoes of this before. the Industrial Revolution replaced handcrafted goods with mass-produced ones. At first, factory-made items were considered inferior. But over time, the values flipped: uniformity, affordability, and speed became virtues. Handcrafting survived, but as a niche, a luxury, something for connoisseurs. In the age of AI, we may be watching the same story unfold for creativity, judgment, and even empathy. When AI becomes the benchmark for productivity, human contributions risk being judged against a machine standard. A human journalist might take 2 days to write a deeply reported story, and AI can produce a similar-sounding article in minutes. Even if the human piece offers richer insight, the market might decide that fast enough is good enough, because speed is measurable, and nuance is not. This shift is not just economic, it's cultural. We begin to measure worth not by the quality of the process, but by the quantity and immediacy of the output. A Kantian view would resist this. Value, in that frame, lies in the dignity of the act itself, in treating the creative process as an end, not merely a means to a product. But markets rarely operate on Kantian ethics. They reward what can be quantified. In entertainment, we already see AI influencing trends by analyzing vast datasets of audience reactions, then generating content optimized for engagement. Over time, this feedback loop can flatten cultural diversity. If machine-optimized stories consistently outperform more idiosyncratic human ones in clicks and streams, producers have a financial incentive to favor the machine's formula. Culture becomes less a dialogue between unique voices and more a feedback circuit tuned to statistical averages. This shift also alters how we see ourselves. Sartre argued that humans define themselves through their projects, the freely chosen acts that shape our essence. But if the highest valued acts in society are ones that machines can do better, faster, and cheaper, humans may begin to withdraw from those domains, ceding them entirely. In doing so, we risk narrowing the very field in which we can create meaning. One unsettling possibility is the emergence of a cultural hierarchy in which human work is valued primarily for what AI cannot yet do. The worth of our contribution becomes defined by the gaps in machine capability rather than by intrinsic human qualities. Today that might mean valuing certain forms of improvisation or deep interpersonal empathy. Tomorrow, it could mean clinging to whatever unpredictable traits the latest AI models still lack. There's also a danger of what I call synthetic nostalgia, a society that continues to praise human-made work, but mostly in curated, commodified contexts, museum exhibitions, premium artisan markets, while daily life runs almost entirely on machine-made content. In such a world, human becomes a brand, not a baseline. The EU AI Act does nod toward transparency, requiring labeling for certain AI-generated media. But transparency alone won't preserve human value if the audience no longer cares about the distinction. We saw this with digital photography. Once it became dominant, few consumers insisted on film, even though they could tell the difference. Resisting this shift means reasserting human value in terms that efficiency cannot capture: the authenticity of lived experience, the unpredictability of genuine emotion, the moral weight of intentional creation. It may require new cultural norms, educational priorities, and even economic policies that explicitly reward depth over speed, diversity over conformity, and meaning over metrics. Closing shot: back to the museum. The camera moves past the AI installation to a quiet corner, where a small, imperfect clay sculpture sits unnoticed. Its plaque reads, "Handmade, 2025. The work isn't flawless, but it carries fingerprints, literal proof of a life touching the world. Preserving human authorship in the synthetic age. Opening shot: a classroom in the late afternoon. A teacher holds up 2 short stories, one written by a student, the other by an AI. The students guess which is which. Half get it wrong. The teacher smiles sadly. This is the new reality. If the value of human creativity is to survive in a world saturated with machine-generated content, we must do more than legislate. Laws can compel disclosure, require labels, and punish deceptive practices, but they cannot, on their own, preserve the cultural significance of human authorship. That task falls to something broader: the deliberate design of our cultural, educational, and technological ecosystems. The first principle is cultural clarity. We must be able to see the difference between human and machine work, not just in metadata, but in how we present and experience art, literature, music, and journalism. Provenance systems like the Content Authenticity Initiative, CAI, and C2PA standards are technical steps toward this, embedding verifiable origin data into files. But provenance alone won't matter unless audiences care about it. In the same way that organic or fair trade labels only became meaningful through cultural demand, we need a shared social value for human-made. The second principle is creative scaffolding, designing AI tools to assist rather than replace. This means building systems that leave room for human input at the conceptual stage and the final polish, even if the middle process is heavily automated. For example, a screenwriting AI could propose plot structures, but the human writer decides the emotional beats, dialogue tone, and thematic arc. The output may still be faster, but it remains a dialogue rather than a download. The third is educational integration. If we train young people to treat AI as a shortcut for production, we risk raising a generation of curators rather than creators. Instead, we can use AI as a sparring partner, something that generates variations, challenges assumptions, or offers stylistic contrasts. This reframes the machine as a stimulus for creativity rather than a substitute for it. In a Kantian sense, this preserves the act of authorship as an end in itself, a deliberate moral act of shaping meaning. The fourth is economic reinforcement. If human creativity is to remain viable as a livelihood, markets must reward it explicitly. This might mean public funding for human-made works, AI usage royalties paid to creators whose work is used in model training, or premium cultural spaces dedicated to verified human authorship. Without economic support, human creativity risks becoming a luxury hobby rather than a sustainable profession. The fifth is design ethics. Developers of creative AI systems should embed friction into their tools, moments where the user must make a choice, add context, or reject an option. Friction is not inefficiency, it's agency. By requiring human engagement, we prevent the creative process from becoming a passive acceptance of the machine's first draft. Of course, there are cultural headwinds. Convenience is seductive, and machine outputs are only getting better. The temptation to outsource not just the labor but the vision of a work will grow stronger each year. Sartre might call this the ultimate bad faith, letting the machine choose for us, while telling ourselves we are still the authors. That's why preservation efforts must be visible, communal, and aspirational. We should celebrate human-made work not just for nostalgia, but for the unique way it carries the traces of experience, mistakes, revisions, intuitive leaps, that no statistical model can replicate. The clay sculpture's fingerprints, the writer's idiosyncratic syntax, the painter's imperfect brushstroke, these are not flaws. They are proofs of existence. If we fail to protect these proofs, we risk not only losing individual voices but altering the cultural DNA that future generations inherit. The synthetic age will not destroy human creativity outright, it will dilute it, blend it into the background noise of generated content, until we forget there was ever a difference. Closing shot, the teacher from the opening scene gives the students a new assignment, not to guess which work is human, but to create something only they could make. The camera lingers on a page as a pen begins to move, slowly, imperfectly, beautifully. Truth on shifting ground. Opening shot, a split screen. On the left, a grainy video of a world leader giving a speech. On the right, an almost identical video, but the words are different, the expression slightly altered. Both look real. One never happened. For most of human history, the challenge of truth was scarcity. We struggled to gather enough reliable information to make sense of the world. In 2025, the challenge has inverted, truth now drowns in abundance. The flood of synthetic media, AI-generated images, videos, voices, and texts, makes it harder than ever to know what to trust. Deepfakes are the most visible symptom. Once a novelty, they are now tools of political warfare, financial fraud, and personal harassment. But the real danger is broader. It's not just that false things look real, but that real things can be dismissed as fake. When every piece of evidence can be plausibly forged, evidence itself becomes suspect. This is the epistemic crisis, a breakdown in the shared trust that underpins democratic discourse, journalism, and even personal relationships. Technologies like the Content Authenticity Initiative, CAI, and the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, C2PA, aim to restore some stability. By embedding cryptographic metadata into files, recording the origin, edit history, and ownership of a piece of media, they offer a way to prove authenticity. Imagine a photo carrying an unbroken chain of custody from the camera that took it to the article where you see it. This is a vital step, but it comes with limits. Provenance systems only work if they're widely adopted. They also require trust in the institutions that issue and verify the metadata. And critically, they can prove where a piece of content came from, they cannot prove whether the content itself is true. A video could be genuinely recorded and unedited, yet still depict a staged or misleading event. The EU AI Act takes a regulatory step here by requiring labeling for AI-generated media in certain contexts, particularly deepfakes. The US, meanwhile, is experimenting with a mix of state-level laws and voluntary industry commitments. In both cases, the gap is clear: labeling and provenance are necessary but insufficient. They are the seatbelt, not the whole crash prevention system. The deeper philosophical question is whether truth can survive in a culture where fabrication is frictionless and detection is always a step behind. In the Enlightenment vision, truth was something that emerged from free inquiry, a public sphere where arguments could be weighed against evidence. Eugen Habermas argued that democracy depends on undistorted communication, where citizens can deliberate based on a shared reality. The synthetic era tests that assumption. When reality itself can be altered at pixel-level precision, the public sphere risks fragmenting into private realities, each with its own facts. There is also the danger of truth fatigue. If the average person feels that determining what's real is too difficult, they may stop trying altogether. This cynicism can be as corrosive as outright deception. It erodes the motivation to seek truth, replacing it with tribal loyalty or emotional resonance as the primary guide for belief. The challenge, then, is twofold: we must build systems that make truth visible, and we must maintain the cultural will to care about it. This means pairing authenticity technology with institutional integrity. News organizations, courts, and educational systems must adapt, not just adopting provenance tools, but also rethinking how to present and verify information in a skeptical age. Some thinkers argue for a truth infrastructure akin to public utilities, shared, non-partisan systems for verifying media at scale, accessible to everyone. Others push for integrating media literacy into education from the earliest grades, so that recognizing manipulation becomes as basic a skill as reading. Still, we must be clear-eyed: no technical fix will restore the epistemic ground to its pre-synthetic stability. The ground has shifted permanently. What we can do is create new footholds, ways to anchor ourselves in a reality that is more contested, more fluid, and more fragile than we might like to admit. Closing shot, the split screen from the opening dissolves into a single blurred frame. Slowly, a faint watermark appears in the corner, not visible at first glance, but enough to tell those who look closely, this one is real. Provenance, building the chain of trust. Opening shot, a courier carrying a sealed envelope through a crowded city. The seal is unbroken when it's delivered. The recipient knows the letter inside is authentic, not because of what it says, but because the chain of custody is intact. Provenance technologies like the Content Authenticity Initiative, CAI, and the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, C2PA, aim to do for digital media what a wax seal once did for letters: guarantee that a piece of content came from where it claims and has not been altered along the way. The idea is deceptively simple. When a camera, phone, or software program creates a file, it can embed metadata, cryptographically signed information that records the time, location, device, and sometimes even the creator's identity. If the file is edited later, those edits are recorded too, creating an unbroken history. This chain of custody allows anyone with the right tools to verify whether the media they're seeing is original, altered, or entirely synthetic. In practice, the system works something like this: creation: the moment content is made, a signature is generated using a private cryptographic key tied to the creator or device. Storage: the signature and metadata are stored alongside the file or in a linked database. Verification: when someone views the file, their software checks the signature against a public key registry to ensure it hasn't been tampered with. Display: the verification result can be shown as a badge, label, or pop-up, telling the viewer whether the file is authentic and, if altered, what those alterations were. The elegance of this system lies in its neutrality. It doesn't care whether the content is flattering, damning, beautiful, or banal, it simply records the facts of its creation and changes. But this neutrality is also a limitation. Provenance tells you how something came to be, not whether it's true. A staged event filmed without edits will still verify as authentic. Adoption is the next hurdle. For provenance to be truly effective, it needs near-universal uptake among both creators and platforms. That means convincing device manufacturers to integrate secure signing into cameras and phones, persuading editing software developers to maintain edit histories, and getting social media companies to preserve and display provenance information rather than stripping it out to save bandwidth. Each of these steps involves cost, coordination, and, in some cases, political will. There's also a potential cultural side effect: the emergence of a two-tier information ecosystem. In one tier, verified content carries visible trust marks and is prioritized by platforms, newsrooms, and courts. In the other, unverified content circulates in the shadows, still consumable, still influential, but treated with suspicion. While this might sound like a win for truth, it risks creating a bias toward those who can afford or access the tools for verified creation. Grassroots activists, whistleblowers, or citizen journalists without provenance-enabled devices could find their voices discounted simply because their work can't be verified under the official system. Philosophically, this raises questions about authority and legitimacy. If we anchor our sense of truth too heavily in provenance systems, we may end up trusting the seal more than the content itself. Kant might warn that this replaces our duty to reason critically with a habit of deferring to external authority. The watermark becomes a shortcut for judgment, which is dangerous if the infrastructure behind it is controlled by a small number of powerful actors. The EU AI Act's provisions for transparency in AI-generated content will likely accelerate provenance adoption in Europe, especially for synthetic media in political advertising or high-risk contexts. In the US, adoption will probably come more through industry coalitions than government mandate, meaning uneven coverage and potentially inconsistent standards. To avoid reinforcing inequalities, some experts argue for open provenance standards, protocols anyone can use, without proprietary restrictions, backed by public infrastructure rather than solely corporate control. Others suggest pairing provenance with contextual verification alongside the origin history. Viewers get accessible explanations of who produced the content, for what purpose, and under what conditions. Closing shot: the courier from the opening scene delivers another sealed envelope. This time, the recipient opens it to find a blank page. The seal is genuine, the chain of custody intact, but the meaning still depends on interpretation. The adversarial game of truth: opening shot: two chess players sit across from each other in a dimly lit room. One moves a pawn forward. The other doesn't move a piece at all, instead, they swap the board entirely. Every truth-preserving technology, no matter how elegant, exists in a constant state of contest. Provenance systems like C2PA and CAI are no exception. The moment a framework for authenticity becomes widely trusted, it also becomes a target. One obvious threat is spoofing, creating false provenance data to give forged content a veneer of legitimacy. If an attacker can compromise a signing key, they can produce media with the same verified status as authentic works. Even without direct key theft, clever social engineering could trick a legitimate device or account into signing malicious content. Another vector is metadata stripping. Many online platforms already compress and reformat media uploads, often removing metadata to save bandwidth or storage. If bad actors deliberately rehost authentic content without its provenance trail, they can sow doubt about its legitimacy. In an environment where no provenance becomes synonymous with fake, this tactic can undermine genuine grassroots reporting. Then there's the tactic of overwhelming the system. Imagine a coordinated campaign flooding the web with contradictory verified content, each piece carrying legitimate provenance but offering conflicting accounts of the same event. In this case, the problem isn't proving authenticity, but interpreting it. The seal becomes meaningless if both truth and falsehood wear it equally well. Philosophically, this is a reminder that truth is not simply a technical property, it's also a social process. A Kantian lens would say that provenance gives us the means to treat others as reasoning agents, by supplying reliable information about origins. But if the social norms for interpreting that information erode, the technology alone cannot restore trust. We must also consider selective trust weaponization. Authoritarian states or corporate interests could enforce provenance standards that they control, branding unverified content as inherently suspect. This could marginalize dissenting voices, especially those who rely on anonymity for safety. In such cases, provenance becomes less a tool for public trust and more an instrument of information control. The arms race dynamic here mirrors the broader cybersecurity world. Every new safeguard spawns a countermeasure, every detection method invites evasion. Just as spam filters sparked an era of increasingly sophisticated phishing, provenance systems will push adversaries to develop equally sophisticated counterforgeries. The question isn't whether these attacks will come, they already have, it's whether our defenses can adapt as quickly as the threats evolve. One strategy is multi-layer verification. Instead of relying solely on cryptographic provenance, combine it with contextual checks, corroboration from independent sources, cross-platform confirmation, and AI-assisted anomaly detection. A video might verify as authentic through C2PA, but also be run through forensic analysis for signs of staging or misrepresentation. Another is public literacy. The more people understand what provenance can and cannot prove, the harder it is for adversaries to weaponize its absence or presence. A seal should signal this is one piece of the puzzle, not this is unquestionable truth. Without this nuance, provenance risks becoming another blunt instrument in the propaganda wars. Finally, we must accept that technical integrity is not the same as epistemic certainty. Even if we build an unbreakable chain of custody, we cannot, and should not, expect it to eliminate disagreement, doubt, or the need for human judgment. The goal is not to create an infallible oracle, but to raise the cost of deception high enough that truth has a fighting chance. Closing shot, back to the chess table. The players are still there, but now the pieces are scattered, the board half-swapped. No one has won. The game continues, not because either side is weak, but because in the realm of truth, the contest never ends. Building a culture of truth opening shot, a bustling town square, not medieval, but digital. Screens float above the crowd, each showing a different truth. The air is thick with noise, yet somewhere, faintly, a clear voice is speaking. The fight for truth in the synthetic age will not be won by technology alone. Provenance tools, watermarking, and AI detection systems are essential, but they are scaffolding, not the building. The foundation is cultural, an information ecosystem where citizens know how to use these tools, where institutions model integrity, and where shared norms make truth-seeking a collective habit rather than a rare virtue. A healthy truth culture rests on three interlocking pillars: authenticity tech, institutional transparency, and civic epistemics. Pillar 1. Authenticity tech. Provenance frameworks like C2PA and CAI provide the infrastructure for verifying media origins. This should be treated like a public utility, with open standards accessible to everyone, not just corporations and governments. The technology must be widely integrated into phones, editing tools, platforms, but also remain voluntary enough to avoid suppressing anonymous or citizen journalism. We need an ecosystem where verification is easy, but its absence isn't automatically disqualifying. Pillar 2. Institutional transparency. No matter how good the tools, trust depends on those who use them. Newsrooms, courts, public agencies, and education systems must embrace transparency not as a PR gesture, but as a core operational principle. This means showing how information is verified, admitting uncertainty when it exists, and correcting errors visibly and promptly. Trust in institutions erodes not because they make mistakes, but because they hide them. The EU AI Act touches this with its labeling requirements for AI-generated media in certain contexts, but cultural transparency is broader. It's about demonstrating an ethic of accountability long before the law demands it. Pillar 3, Civic Epistemics. Epistemics is the philosophy of how we know what we know. A civic epistemic culture means citizens collectively practice critical evaluation, cross-checking sources, understanding bias, and distinguishing between provenance and truth. This is less about teaching people what to think and more about making the act of verification part of everyday life. In Habermasian terms, it's sustaining a public sphere where undistorted communication is possible because participants are equipped to resist distortion. Without these pillars, even perfect technology will fail. A society that doesn't care to verify will let misinformation slip by. A society that doesn't trust institutions will suspect even genuine verification, and a society without shared epistemic norms will fragment into incompatible realities. The risk is not just falsehood, it's truth fatigue. When the volume of conflicting claims overwhelms the public, people may retreat into apathy or tribal loyalty, trusting only the voices that affirm their identity. At that point, the provenance seal on a photo is less persuasive than whether the photo feels right to one's group. In such a climate, the culture of truth collapses, replaced by a culture of confirmation. Some propose truth literacy programs, mandatory in schools, offered in workplaces, and incentivized through public campaigns. These would teach people to use provenance tools, but also to ask deeper questions: who made this? For what purpose? What's missing from the frame? Others suggest embedding transparency into platforms, so every image, video, or claim carries an accessible origin card that's just one click away. There's also a role for ritual. In the same way societies once ritualized public oaths or civic ceremonies, we could ritualize verification, turning it into something visible, communal, and valued. Imagine nightly news broadcasts or social media feeds where the act of showing provenance is as expected as showing a headline. Over time, this normalizes truth-checking as a civic duty. Philosophically, this is about reclaiming truth as a public good. Kant might frame it as a categorical imperative: act only on what you would will to be universally accepted as true. Habermas would see it as strengthening the conditions for rational discourse. Both would agree that without a culture to sustain it, truth will always be outmatched by expedience. Closing shot, the digital town square again. The noise hasn't gone away, but here and there, more people are pausing to check the source before they speak. The clear voice is a little louder now, not because the noise has stopped, but because more people have chosen to listen. Freedom as a civic design. Opening shot, a park in the early morning. People walk along different paths, some paved, some winding through grass. No signs forbid which route to take, yet each choice feels deliberate. The space was designed for freedom, not just movement. When we speak about freedom in the age of AI, we often think of it as a negative space, the absence of restriction. But in 2025, freedom must also be a positive architecture, a system deliberately built to preserve the capacity for self-determination in environments shaped by machines. This shift is necessary because AI doesn't simply limit or expand our options, it redesigns the conditions under which we choose. Recommendation systems, predictive analytics, and optimization engines don't chain us to a single path, they make one path so smooth, so frictionless, that the others fade from view. In political philosophy, Isaiah Berlin distinguished between negative liberty, freedom from interference, and positive liberty, freedom to act as one's own master. Kant pushed further: autonomy is not merely doing as you please, but giving yourself the law you follow. In a digital ecosystem, that means more than having the legal right to make decisions, it means having the cognitive and informational space to make them meaningfully. So how do we design for that? It begins with the recognition that autonomy is not self-sustaining in the face of systemic optimization. Just as cities must design for accessibility, democracies must design for deliberation. That means embedding into AI-driven systems the conditions that keep human judgment alive. Visible alternatives interfaces should not just present the most probable choice, they should show the viable range of choices. In a navigation app, this means seeing multiple routes by default, not just the best one. In a news feed, it means deliberately surfacing perspectives outside your predicted preference profile. Frictions that matter. Optimization tends to erase friction, but certain frictions are virtues. A prompt that asks, "Are you sure?" before sending a heated reply can be more valuable than instant messaging speed. These moments give us space to reconsider and act from reason rather than reflex. Right to refuse personalization. Citizens should be able to opt out of algorithmic tailoring without losing access to services. Choosing the manual mode should not be penalized with degraded quality, slower access, or hidden features. Transparent influence mapping. Imagine a dashboard that lets you see your recommendations are shaped 40 by past clicks, 30 by demographic data, and 30 by trending topics. This doesn't just expose the system, it makes the user a participant in shaping it. The EU AI Act's emphasis on transparency, especially for high-risk systems, points toward this kind of design, but regulation alone can't make freedom a lived reality. The architecture must be cultural as well as technical. Here's where civic philosophy becomes crucial. Freedom in the AI age isn't just the domain of individual willpower, it's a shared infrastructure. We need public institutions, educational systems, and even social rituals that reinforce our role as agents rather than endpoints in a predictive loop. This could take the form of civic tech literacy programs that treat AI influence awareness as fundamental as reading and writing. Public deliberation platforms designed to model slow, reasoned debate, rather than fast emotional reaction. Design ethics standards enforced not only by regulators but adopted as professional codes in tech industries. Sartre would argue that even in the most constrained systems, we are condemned to be free, forced to choose, even when we deny it. But this existential truth doesn't absolve us from shaping the systems that make those choices harder or easier. If we let AI systems narrow our vision while telling ourselves we're still in control, we are living in bad faith. A freedom worth defending in 2025 is not just the freedom to pick from a menu, but the freedom to write the menu, and to know when it has been rewritten without our consent. It's the capacity to resist when the smooth path is not the right one, to walk the harder route because it aligns with our values, not just our predictions. Closing shot, back to the park. A person stands at a fork in the path. One trail is clear and direct, the other overgrown but inviting. They pause, not because they're lost, but because they know the choice matters. The legal scaffolding for freedom. Opening shot, a massive steel framework rising against a city skyline. It is not yet a building, just beams, joints, and braces, but without it, nothing stable could stand. If freedom in the AI age must be designed, then law is its scaffolding, the structure that holds our civic architecture in place while culture and technology evolve. Without it, the weight of optimization, commercial incentives, and state power will pull human autonomy into the path of least resistance. The EU AI Act, finalized in 2025, is the most ambitious attempt yet to build such scaffolding. Its risk-based approach classifies AI systems from minimal to unacceptable risk, imposing heavier requirements on those that could meaningfully affect rights, safety, or democracy. High-risk systems, like those used in hiring, education, or critical infrastructure, must meet strict transparency, accountability, and human oversight standards. The Act also bans certain uses outright, such as social scoring by governments. This approach aligns with Kant's idea that laws should protect the conditions for autonomy, not just prevent harm. By mandating transparency and human-in-the-loop decision-making for high-impact AI, the Act tries to ensure that humans retain the power to set ends, not just select among machine-generated means. The US, lacking a single comprehensive AI law, has taken a more fragmented route. Federal agencies issue sector-specific guidance, while states experiment with their own AI accountability bills. The AI Bill of Rights framework, though non-binding, outlines principles like notice, explanation, and freedom from algorithmic discrimination. Its weakness is enforcement. Without statutory power, these rights remain more moral aspiration than legal shield. Globally, three legal philosophies are emerging: precautionary regulation, the EU model, prioritizing risk prevention and rights protection, even at the cost of slower innovation; market-led governance, the US model, relying on competition and self-regulation, with law stepping in mainly after harm is proven; sovereign control, the Chinese model, where AI law doubles as an instrument of state authority, emphasizing censorship, surveillance, and strategic advantage over individual liberty. For freedom to survive across these contexts, policy must do more than prevent bad AI uses. It must proactively preserve choice architecture. That means right to algorithmic transparency not just for regulators, but for citizens, ensuring individuals can see why a system recommended or decided something. Without this, we cannot meaningfully contest or override machine judgment. Right to non-optimized participation. Citizens should be able to interact with digital services without personalization or behavioral nudging. This protects against subtle steering that erodes genuine choice. Interoperability mandates preventing lock-in by requiring that users can move data, preferences, and histories between platforms. This keeps the digital environment plural rather than monopolistic. Mandatory impact assessment. Similar to environmental reviews, these would evaluate not just safety or accuracy, but effects on human agency, democratic participation, and cultural diversity. Human override standards codifying when and how humans must be able to reverse or veto AI outputs, especially in high-stakes domains like criminal justice or healthcare. The challenge is enforcement. Even the most elegant legal scaffolding collapses if underfunded, undermined by lobbying, or outpaced by technological change. And yet, the alternative, no scaffolding at all, means allowing invisible architectures of influence to shape the boundaries of our freedom without consent or contest. Philosophically, law in the AI era must blend Berlin's negative liberty, freedom from coercion, with positive liberty, freedom through enabling conditions. It must protect citizens from both explicit overreach and the subtler erosions of choice that come from opaque optimization. The danger, as Sartre might note, is that people will surrender their freedom willingly, in exchange for convenience or certainty. Legal scaffolding cannot prevent this entirely, but it can keep the space for choice open long enough for culture to defend it. Closing shot, the steel framework again, now wrapped in scaffolding netting. Workers are climbing, securing beams. The building isn't done, but without the frame, it could never rise. Psychological resilience in the age of prediction. Opening shot, a person sitting in a quiet room, phone on the table. Notifications light up in rhythmic bursts. They glance over, then look away. The pull is there, but the choice is theirs. Legal scaffolding can protect the outer boundaries of our freedom, but without inner resilience, we remain vulnerable to the subtler forces of AI influence. Predictive systems are not overt tyrants, they are quiet gardeners, pruning our attention, shaping our preferences, and training us to think in patterns that serve their optimization goals. Psychological resilience in this environment is not simply about self-control. It is about agency literacy, knowing when, how, and why our choices are being steered, and having the mental tools to resist when that steering diverges from our values. 3 capacities define resilience in AI-shaped environments. 1. Meta-awareness of influence. The first defense is recognizing the architecture of persuasion around us. Behavioral scientists call this metacognition, the ability to notice your own thought process. In the AI context, it means catching the moment when a recommendation, notification, or interface layout nudges you toward a choice you did not consciously make. For example, a video autoplay that pushes you to keep watching, a feed that arranges stories to provoke emotional reactions, a shopping suggestion that blends seamlessly into editorial content. By naming the nudge, you loosen its grip. 2. Cognitive diversification. Just as an investor diversifies assets to reduce risk, a resilient mind diversifies its information diet. Predictive systems thrive on narrowing inputs, serving you more of what you've already consumed. The antidote is deliberate exposure to multiple, even contradictory, perspectives. This breaks the feedback loops that predictive systems rely on to reinforce habits. It also aligns with John Stuart Mill's argument in On Liberty: truth is better approached through the clash of ideas than the comfort of echo chambers. In practice, this can mean subscribing to news sources across ideological lines, engaging with unfamiliar art, or discussing topics with people outside your social bubble. 3. Deliberate friction practices. The human mind evolved in an environment of slower decision-making. Predictive systems collapse that time, replacing reflection with impulse. Resilience means reintroducing friction, not as an inconvenience, but as a safeguard. This might be as simple as waiting 24 hours before making significant purchases suggested by AI. Using browser extensions that block infinite scroll or hide algorithmic recommendations. Scheduling decision-free periods where you consume without interacting, observing without committing. Friction restores the moment of choice, giving space for the Kantian question, am I acting from my own will, or merely reacting to stimulus? Why psychological resilience matters without it, legal protections risk becoming symbolic. A right to opt out of personalization means little if our habits have already been shaped to prefer it. Similarly, transparency laws won't help if we lack the patience or discipline to read and interpret what is revealed. Sartre might frame resilience as the refusal to live in bad faith. Bad faith is the comfort of letting someone, or something, decide for us while we tell ourselves we are still choosing. Predictive systems thrive on bad faith, offering the illusion of control while scripting the menu of options. Building resilience is not a solitary act. It requires social reinforcement. Families, workplaces, and communities can normalize habits of questioning and resisting algorithmic pull. Schools can teach children to analyze digital environments as critically as they read literature. Public campaigns can celebrate acts of slow decision-making as much as they do speed or convenience. There is also an emotional dimension. Resisting predictive influence often means tolerating uncertainty, ambiguity, and even boredom. These are the spaces where reflection happens, but they feel uncomfortable in a culture of constant stimulation. Learning to sit in that discomfort is a muscle we must collectively retrain. Closing shot, the person in the quiet room picks up their phone. They open an app, scroll, then pause. The screen dims as they set it down again, not out of willpower alone, but out of an understanding of the game being played. A blueprint for agency in 2025 opening shot, a table in a dimly lit study. Spread across it are blueprints, not for buildings, but for systems. Circles, lines, and annotations map the flow of influence, the architecture of choice, the defenses of freedom. The last three parts have explored the elements we need: civic design for freedom, legal scaffolding to hold it in place, and psychological resilience to inhabit it fully. But individually, these are just components. The task now is to fuse them into a coherent civic philosophy, a blueprint for living as free agents in an age where prediction and persuasion are ambient, persistent, and often invisible. Step 1. Anchor in principles. Any blueprint for agency begins with clear, non-negotiable principles. These serve as the load-bearing beams of our design. Autonomy is a right, not a privilege. It cannot be traded away for convenience without eroding its foundation. Transparency is a condition of trust. Systems that affect decisions must show their workings, in terms a layperson can understand. Plurality strengthens freedom. Monopolistic platforms, single-point recommendation engines, or cultural homogeneity all weaken our ability to choose. Friction is not the enemy. Some slowness is a safeguard, not a flaw. Step 2. Integrate the layers. The blueprint has three interlocking layers: structural layer, law policy. This is the legal scaffolding from Section 7, Part 2. It codifies the right to opt out of optimization, mandates human oversight in high-stakes domains, and enforces interoperability. It ensures that the park of choices described in Part 1 remains open to all, not fenced off by commercial or political interests. Behavioral layer, resilience literacy, from Part 3, agency literacy, cognitive diversification, and deliberate friction practices become normalized at the societal level. Citizens are not just protected by law, they are equipped to use their freedom well. This layer turns abstract rights into lived habits. Cultural layer, shared norms. Institutions. A free society is sustained not only by individuals who value autonomy, but by a culture that rewards it. This means newsrooms that explain their sourcing, tech companies that publish influence maps, schools that teach algorithmic analysis alongside history. These layers reinforce each other. Laws make habits easier to adopt. Habits create demand for better laws. Cultural norms keep both from drifting into irrelevance. Step 3. Guard against drift. No design is immune to decay. In politics, this is known as mission creep. In architecture, it's structural fatigue. In civic freedom, it's influence drift, the slow normalization of manipulation until it disappears from view. Guarding against drift means building in constant feedback loops, annual civic audits of major AI platforms, evaluating not just compliance but real-world impact on autonomy. Public influence dashboards showing citizens how recommendation systems shift over time. Rotating oversight councils to avoid regulatory capture, ensuring no single group monopolizes the definition of freedom. Step 4. Make it visible. The most dangerous threats to freedom are those that become invisible through familiarity. That's why the blueprint insists on visibility by design. When a system suggests, filters, or prioritizes, the act should be marked as clearly as a street sign. This aligns with Kant's demand for transparency in moral reasoning. Nothing that affects the will should operate in secrecy. Step 5. Accept imperfection. Demand improvement to final truth. There is no flawless design. AI will always evolve faster than regulation. Influence will always outpace detection. The goal is not to eliminate manipulation entirely, an impossible task, but to keep it contestable, slow enough to resist, and visible enough to name. Here, Sartre's existentialism offers a grounding reminder: we are always already free, but that freedom is a burden as much as a gift. The blueprint cannot carry that burden for us, it can only give us the tools to bear it together. Closing shot, the table of blueprints again. This time, the lines and symbols begin to animate, forming a living network. Paths light up, choices branch, and the camera pulls back to reveal they are not plans for a building, but for a society, one designed to keep the act of choosing alive. From philosophy to praxis. Opening shot, a philosopher's study, books piled high. A hand closes one of them, and the camera follows as the person walks outside, into a crowded street where autonomous vehicles glide past and augmented reality adds hover in the air. Philosophy begins in the realm of ideas. Praxis lives in the friction of reality. In the age of AI, the chasm between the two is dangerous. When ideals remain theoretical, systems evolve without their guidance. The challenge of 2025 is not that we lack philosophical insight. Kant, Sartre, Berlin, Habermas, and countless others have already given us a rich vocabulary for freedom, autonomy, and ethics. The challenge is that these insights rarely survive intact when translated into design requirements, policy documents, or code. Why translation matters. AI operates in spaces philosophy often describes abstractly: agency, intention, fairness, dignity. But engineers, product managers, and legislators need these concepts in operational terms. Respect human autonomy is a moral imperative. Provide a clearly marked opt-out from personalized recommendations, without degrading service is a design directive. Without translation, philosophy stays on the shelf while algorithms quietly reshape the human condition. Principle 1. Kantian autonomy. User sovereignty protocols. Kant's autonomy, acting according to self-given laws, becomes, in practice, the guarantee that users can meaningfully set their own boundaries within digital systems. This could mean default settings that prioritize user control over data collection. Clear, reversible permissions for algorithmic personalization. Interfaces that make opting out as easy as opting in. These are not merely features, they are moral architecture embedded in code. Principle 2. Sartrean bad faith. Algorithmic reflex awareness. Sartre's warning against bad faith, deceiving oneself into believing one's actions are wholly determined, translates into combating algorithmic fatalism. AI systems must present themselves as tools, not oracles. In practice, explicit disclaimers that recommendations are probabilistic, not inevitable. Visualizations showing alternative predictions that the system considered. Prompts that ask the user to reflect on their choice rather than passively accept it. Principle 3. Habermasian discourse ethics. Open algorithmic deliberation. Habermas argued that legitimate decisions arise from undistorted communication among free and equal participants. In the AI context, this means opening the black box to scrutiny, publishing influence maps showing how inputs are weighted in recommendations. Hosting public consultations on major algorithmic policy shifts. Allowing third-party audits to confirm that system behavior matches stated goals. Principle 4. Berlin's two freedoms. Dual policy framework. Berlin's distinction between negative liberty, freedom from interference, and positive liberty, freedom to self-determine, becomes a dual regulatory approach, laws that protect citizens from coercive or manipulative AI uses. laws that actively enable citizens to shape, customize, or reject AI influence. This two-track model prevents the common error of thinking freedom is secured simply by banning harmful acts. It also requires fostering the conditions for self-rule. Operational hurdles. The path from philosophy to praxis is blocked by several recurring problems. Abstraction decay. Concepts like dignity or autonomy lose their depth when compressed into checkboxes or compliance metrics. Conflict of metrics. Ethical goals often clash with business incentives, especially in attention-driven economies. Cultural translation. What autonomy means in Berlin may differ from what it means in Nairobi, Beijing, or Sao Paulo. A single global policy may protect freedom in one culture while undermining it in another. Overcoming these requires continuous iteration. Laws, design guidelines, and cultural norms must be revisited as systems evolve. It also requires interdisciplinary fluency, ethicists who understand code, engineers who understand Kant, and lawmakers who can read both a regulatory clause and a philosophical argument. Closing image. The philosopher from the opening shot steps into the flow of the street. Around them, people interact with AI-driven systems in subtle ways, checking directions, receiving alerts, scanning news. The philosopher doesn't retreat back to the study. They stop, pull out a tablet, and begin sketching, not another abstract argument, but a blueprint for how the street itself could honor the freedom of everyone walking it. Technologists as moral agents. Opening shot, a late-night coding session. A developer sits alone, lit only by the blue glow of their monitor. On screen, a line of code that will determine what millions of people see tomorrow. In the past, moral philosophy was the domain of thinkers, legislators, and occasionally revolutionaries. But in 2025, lines of code, model weights, and interface decisions carry as much moral weight as laws or treaties. Engineers, designers, and AI researchers have become de facto philosophers, whether they acknowledge it or not, because their decisions shape the conditions under which billions of people think, choose, and act. The invisible legislators. When an algorithm decides which stories appear first in your feed, it is not merely delivering content, it is defining the boundaries of your perceived reality. When a design team decides whether to make an opt-out button easy or hard to find, they are determining whether autonomy is accessible or buried. These micro-decisions are not neutral, they are moral choices embedded in technical form. In this sense, technologists are invisible legislators. Their work passes into daily life without public debate, yet it governs behaviors, beliefs, and even political outcomes. The absence of a public vote does not remove moral responsibility, it increases it. The myth of neutrality. Many technologists still cling to the belief that their role is purely technical. But neutrality dissolves the moment a choice between trade-offs appears: privacy versus personalization, accuracy versus explainability, engagement versus well-being. Kant would argue that the categorical imperative applies as much to system design as to individual acts. Build only those features you would will to be a universal law. Would you will that all platforms hide their influence? That all algorithms prioritize attention capture over informed choice? Moral burdens unique to technologists. Scale of impact. A single design decision, say, whether a recommender system amplifies outrage, can ripple through millions of minds within hours. The moral weight of scale means that harm or benefit is magnified beyond what most professions ever encounter. Asymmetry of power. Technologists often understand the systems far better than the people affected by them. This informational asymmetry creates an ethical obligation to design with the user's long-term interest in mind, even when the user cannot anticipate the risks. Temporal reach. Code written today may shape behavior for years, long after its author has moved on. In this sense, technologists are not only moral agents in the present, they are architects of future moral landscapes. A code of ethics worth more than compliance. Most tech companies already have AI principles documents. The problem is that these are often written as PR artifacts, not operational manuals. A real code of ethics for technologists would be actionable. Every principle is tied to a concrete design or engineering behavior. Testable. Anyone on the team can verify whether a system meets the principle without legal or PR mediation. Enforceable. Violations have real consequences, not just internal learning opportunities. For example, principle, respect user autonomy. Action: no critical feature should default as on without explicit consent. Test: a new hire, with no inside knowledge, can disable or adjust it within 60 seconds. Technologists as philosophical practitioners. Philosophy in this context is not a separate discipline, it's embedded in every pull request, UX flow, and data pipeline. A designer deciding whether to add infinite scroll is, in effect, making a judgment about the balance between freedom and compulsion. An engineer setting the temperature of a generative model is deciding how much unpredictability to allow into cultural production. Sartre would say that in these moments, the technologist cannot escape responsibility. Even choosing to follow standard practice is itself a choice, one that affirms a certain world over another. The cultural shift needed if technologists are to embrace their role as moral agents. The culture of technology must change, from move fast and break things to move deliberately and weigh consequences. From product metrics as the sole success measure to ethical impact as an equal metric. From isolated teams to interdisciplinary review boards with ethicists, sociologists, and affected users. This isn't about slowing innovation, it's about preventing innovation from eroding the very freedoms it promises to enhance. Closing shot, the developer from the opening scene leans back from the screen. The line of code is still there. They hover over commit changes. It's a small decision in the moment, but they know it will shape the world someone else wakes up in tomorrow. Citizens as co-authors of AI ethics. Opening shot, a crowded town hall, not in the 18th century but in 2025. Instead of parchment and quills, people have laptops and phones. Screens on the wall show live feeds from homes across the city, and a scrolling banner reads, Public Deliberation on Algorithmic Governance, Open Session. For most of history, technology has been something the public receives, not shapes. But AI in 2025 is too entwined with everyday life, too embedded in the way we learn, work, communicate, and even perceive truth, to be left solely to engineers, lawmakers, or corporate boards. If freedom is to survive, citizens cannot merely be users of AI systems. They must become co-authors of the rules that govern them. From subjects to stakeholders, the default relationship between the public and AI is passive. Systems are deployed, terms of service are updated, and users adapt, or leave. But passive subjects cannot defend autonomy. Co-authorship begins with recognizing that the public is not an audience but a stakeholder. AI affects elections, labor markets, cultural norms, and even how people form relationships. If those affected have no voice in its design or governance, the democratic fabric thins. 3 pathways to citizen co-authorship. Participatory policymaking. Cities and nations can host structured citizen assemblies on AI ethics, similar to climate assemblies in Europe. Randomly selected, demographically representative groups can deliberate on specific AI issues, facial recognition in public spaces, algorithmic policing, automated hiring, and produce recommendations for lawmakers. This approach draws from Habermas's discourse ethics. Legitimate governance emerges from inclusive, reasoned debate among equals. Digital platforms can expand this model globally, allowing transnational deliberation on AI policies that cross borders. Public algorithmic review boards. Think of these as school boards for algorithms. Local or national bodies could include both technical experts and lay citizens, with authority to review high-impact AI systems before deployment. Such boards would have the power to request transparency reports, test systems for bias and autonomy erosion, mandate changes or block deployment in their jurisdiction. This flips the narrative from public oversight is too slow for AI to AI is too impactful to proceed without public oversight. Civic technology sandboxes. Publicly funded spaces where citizens can experiment with AI tools, inspect code, and propose modifications. These sandboxes demystify AI, turning it from a black box into a civic commons. They also serve as early warning systems. If ordinary people can identify manipulative or exploitative features, regulators can act before harm scale. The psychological shift required for co-authorship to work: citizens must believe their voice matters in technical domains. Many feel AI is too complex to question. This is not a natural truth, it's a manufactured distance, reinforced by jargon and opacity. Public education here is less about teaching everyone to code and more about teaching critical interface literacy, What is this system trying to optimize? Who controls its training data? How could it fail, and who would be harmed if it did? When people can ask these questions confidently, they begin to see AI governance as part of civic life, not as an arcane specialty. The risks of co-authorship citizen involvement is no guarantee of better outcomes. Populist waves can push for reactionary or short-sighted policies. Misinformation can poison deliberation. Corporations can fund astroturf public opinion campaigns. But the alternative, decisions made entirely in boardrooms or ministries, carries its own risk, the slow normalization of systems that serve commercial or political power over human dignity. The goal is not perfect public wisdom, but a balance of voices that keeps power distributed and contestable. From Kant to the Commons, Kant argued that every rational being must be treated as an end in themselves, never merely as a means. Co-authorship operationalizes this in the AI age. Citizens are not mere data sources to be mined, but agents whose consent and participation define the system's legitimacy. The commons metaphor is useful here. Just as a community tends a shared forest or river, so too must we tend the information and decision ecosystems we live in. Co-authorship is not a one-time vote, it is ongoing stewardship. Closing shot, the town hall disperses. People step back into the night, their devices glowing softly in their hands. Somewhere, a developer will write the next algorithm. But this time, the blueprint they follow won't come only from a company directive, it will bear the fingerprints of the people who will live with its consequences. Toward a sustainable governance model for AI opening shot, a vast bridge stretching over turbulent waters. On one side, the world of ideas, philosophy, ethics, moral theory. On the other, the bustling machinery of daily life, apps, policies, markets, and elections. The bridge is incomplete, its final span waiting to be built. The preceding parts have given us the raw materials, philosophical principles made operational, technologists who accept their moral role, and citizens empowered as co-authors. Now the question becomes, how do we fuse these into a single, sustainable governance model, one that endures not just for the AI of today, but for the transformations that will follow? The three-pillar architecture ethical infrastructure. This is the foundation, the codified moral commitments that all AI systems in a given jurisdiction must follow. It integrates Kantian respect for autonomy, Sartre's demand for authenticity, Berlin's balance of positive and negative liberty, and Habermas's insistence on inclusive discourse. Mechanism, binding laws, constitutional amendments, and AI charters that cannot be quietly altered without public consent. Purpose, keep the boundaries of freedom non-negotiable, even as technology evolves. Distributed oversight. This pillar ensures power is not centralized. Technologists act as moral agents, but they operate alongside citizen review boards, independent audit bodies, and academic ethics councils. Mechanism, multi-level review, local, national, and international, so that no single actor can set the rules in isolation. Purpose, maintain contestability. A decision that affects millions must always be open to challenge from multiple directions. Adaptive civic culture. Even the best infrastructure and oversight will erode without a culture that understands and values freedom in the digital sphere. This requires education systems, public media, and civic spaces that teach not just what the rules are, but why they matter. Mechanism, algorithm literacy in schools, regular public deliberations, and mainstream storytelling that explores the stakes of AI ethics. Purpose, prevent drift into complacency, where freedom is taken for granted until it quietly disappears. The feedback loop that sustains it. These pillars do not operate in silos, they feed each other. Ethical infrastructure shapes the duties of technologists and the rights of citizens. Distributed oversight enforces those duties and refines those rights. Adaptive civic culture ensures that the public can meaningfully engage with and defend both. In practice, this means every major AI deployment triggers a cycle, ethical review by technologists and citizen boards. Transparent public reporting on intended and observed impacts. Policy adjustments based on real-world outcomes. This loop makes governance a living system, less like a static constitution, more like an immune system that learns and adapts. Global interdependent sustainable governance in 2025 cannot be purely national. AI systems cross borders effortlessly. An algorithm deployed in one country can shape political discourse in another. This demands international ethical compacts, agreements not unlike climate accords, where nations pledge to uphold shared AI principles while allowing for local interpretation. The danger is twofold. Without global coordination, ethical safe zones will be undermined by weaker jurisdictions that allow exploitative systems. With too much uniformity, cultural diversity in values and governance could be suppressed. A sustainable model must balance universality, core human rights, with pluralism, local moral traditions. Why this model could hold? Unlike rigid top-down control, the three-pillar architecture thrives on flexibility and redundancy. If one pillar weakens, say, a government erodes legal protections, citizen oversight and cultural resilience can still resist authoritarian drift. If civic culture wanes, strong laws and independent audits can hold the line until it recovers. This mirrors ecological stability. Diversity of systems creates resilience. A monoculture of governance, whether purely corporate, purely state-driven, or purely populist, cannot withstand the pace and complexity of AI evolution. The real risk, abandonment. The greatest threat to this governance model is not outright attack but neglect. It is easy, once laws are passed and boards established, to believe the work is done. But sustainable governance is a practice, not a product. Without constant renewal, principles fade, oversight bodies ossify, and culture drifts into convenience-driven submission. Sartre's reminder echoes here: freedom is not a state we achieve once and for all, it is a continual act of creation. This model works only if we keep building the bridge, even when the waters below look calm. Closing shot, the camera glides over the bridge. Workers from all walks of life, engineers, lawmakers, citizens, are laying the final span together. The bridge does not end on the far shore, it continues into the mist, suggesting the journey of governance will never truly be complete.